Chapter 1952. P.S. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes. Liu Xiaoyi was wavering between his choices. One moment he favored practical results, the next moment he favored ethics and morality, even though it was strange for an existence like him to talk about morality. No matter how much he hesitated, he still had to make a decision. In the end, in the balance of his heart, he was more inclined to follow reason and morality. Of course, to him, it was not so high and mighty. It was just a kind of bottom-line thinking. There was a price to pay for insisting on the bottom line. The price was that the speed of his light circle's descent began to slow down to the point that it made people's hair stand on end. During this process, he began to learn how to control it appropriately. For example, he no longer needed to wait day by day. Instead, he could shorten the time he needed to comprehend it every few days, or even every 10 days. It was like the fast rewind button of a video recorder. This helped him to quickly pass through those useless periods, such as the infancy stage. He had encountered a good opportunity to forcefully fuse. After so many reincarnations and reverse reincarnations, Liu Xiaoyi had a deep understanding of reincarnation and the mystery of being in the womb. At the same time, he also discovered many regularities, such as the time interval between reincarnations. Not everyone would be able to enter the next life immediately after death. There was a problem of waiting in line. The length of waiting time was determined by the heavenly axiom's judgment of good and evil in the previous life. This was also the reason why some people in the mortal world described so-and-so as a good person for several lifetimes. Because of the accumulation of good deeds, the reincarnation was particularly fast. However, few people had heard a bad person for 9 lifetimes. This was because their reincarnation was always intermittent. The heavenly axiom deliberately made souls like them wait in line. Liu Xiaoyi had explored this experience. Until now, he could basically deduce whether this body had done more good deeds or more evil deeds in the previous life. After dozens of lifetimes, he found that although his body was not very good, it was still a good person overall. Therefore, the waiting time in line was very short. This was a reward from the heavenly axiom. However, in his current situation, it was disadvantageous for him to forcefully fuse. In order to achieve a perfect fusion process, it was better to wait for a longer time. For him, who had grasped similar regularities, this might be a rare opportunity for him. Should he do it or not? His consciousness was once again immersed in the fetus. At this moment, his senses were particularly sensitive. He could feel that he was very likely an evil person in his previous life. He could feel that this kind of possession could reduce the influence of morality to the minimum. He could feel that all the conditions for possession had been met. He was afraid that he would not be able to wait for a more suitable opportunity than this one. He could also feel that it was difficult for his spiritual circle to sink any further. Everything was ready except for the east wind. The east wind was his determination. When the conditions are right, success will follow naturally. This should be the cultivation philosophy of a cultivator. Follow the will of the heavens and follow one's heart. He went through all of this in his consciousness again and smiled. He stopped thinking and didn't want to tire himself out. Instead, he chose to sleep with the embryos. This was a crucial choice. After experiencing dozens of reincarnations, he gave up on the things that he had understood for such a long time. He gave himself to the cultivation of doing nothing and let nature take its course. This was a gamble. He was betting on bidding farewell to mediocrity and having a brighter future. After a long wait, when he appeared in his reincarnation again, he was besieged by a group of chivalrous people. As the continent's most notorious bandit, murderer, and sex fiend, his hands were stained with blood. He had escaped from the encirclement of righteous people countless times. But this time, he couldn't escape anymore. When numerous weapons pierced his body, what made the chivalrous people shudder was that this evil person's face had a smile that came from his heart. A carefree smile. A smile as if a burden had been lifted. A smile full of hope. Because the spiritual circle above his head was no longer there. It didn't disappear. Instead, it was in the sea of consciousness of this body, merging with the body and becoming one. He made the right bet. The spiritual circle didn't need to be in direct contact with the human body. The factors to consider were actually other factors. A person, even if they were at different ages and stages in their life, would not be completely the same person. How could there be a difference between reincarnations? Change was the true essence of the universe, and that included humans. His body was already dead. This time, because his spirit and body had completely merged, the reincarnation cycle was interrupted. He didn't continue his reincarnation journey. He couldn't do it, and there was no need to. He withdrew from the initial state when he entered this ordinary world. He felt that his abilities had recovered. Looking in from here, all the paths of the ordinary world were open to him. That was the entrance to his countless pasts. Only one path was closed. He could guess what was behind this path. That must be the magnificent life of a swordsman. He gave up. From now on, it had nothing to do with him, because he had chosen to be the truly ordinary young master of Lu province. If one path was opened, another would naturally be closed. It was impossible to eat more than one. Why was it one path and not two? He had two special pasts. There was only one answer. Those two paths were very likely the same thing. He wasn't necessarily a transmigrator. The masters of those two paths were, but he wasn't. He was a native. This was the truth of the matter. From now on, when other cultivators looked at his future, they would no longer be able to see the strange phenomenon that had once appeared. That past life's past, that peerless evil sword, was destined to become history, and he had forever lost the opportunity to understand this past. He didn't regret it. Compared to listening to other people's stories, he wanted to have his own story. He didn't leave. Instead, he stood here for a long time, gazing at this past that had already been closed to him. This past had given him too much help at the beginning of his cultivation. It could be said that most of his early important opportunities had come from here. Without this past, he didn't know if he could still reach his current height. It even involved those existences that silently supported him from behind. Elder Geo, Big Bird, Fat Otaku, Black Dragon, Wild Boarbian, and so on. Without this past, he was destined to have no fate with these existences. This was a fact. He wasn't someone who would turn hostile after receiving favors from others. On the contrary, he especially valued these things. He laughed softly and murmured, "Many thanks for your company and help. Please forgive me for my youth and ignorance. But you must know, little eagle will eventually grow up, forever staying under a powerful wing. It's destined that he won't be able to spread his wings and soar high, conquering the clouds and defying the wind. So he has to eat the eggshell and face everything alone. I won't say thanks because I still have to wipe your ass. This is the most difficult task in this world. Consider it my repayment to you." Chapter 1953. Lu Xiaoyi had finally solved the problem of his past. Li Wuya, the time traveler, liked to stir shit and wanted to change the world. However, this was not the exclusive right of the time traveler. The Aborigines also had this right. The time traveler had failed, and now it was up to the Aborigines. In other words, the time traveler had started, and now it was time for him to continue. Towards a crow ancestor, he had always been rude. He was not an ingrate, but a soul who wanted to get rid of the influence of others and be more independent. Just like a son to his father, respect was one thing, disobedience was another. There was no conflict. He just wanted to prove himself. This was the common problem of every promising child, and he was no exception. After pouring out his heart, he finally relaxed. This was a necessary attitude for the path he was going to take in the future. Since the burden was gone, he no longer had any worries. He quickly retreated and appeared in the void of the universe, a place he was very familiar with. When he looked back, his surroundings were empty. Where was the ordinary world and the countless roads? There was only a void, and a void beast was peeking its head out and running away in panic. Odd Righteous Pure Land. This was the Odd Righteous Pure Land. It did not exist in the void, but in the heart of every cultivator. It was the only way for immortals to climb up. However, the universe was in chaos, and even a small half-immortal like him had the opportunity to experience the wonders of the odd, righteous, pure land. He could pass the test of the odd, righteous, pure land because he understood that a person was always changing, just like how you could never step into the same river. Therefore, it did not matter how many feet Lu Shan was. It was just a matter of how much he changed. As long as he existed, it meant that he had a connection with his past, and there was something in common. The key was the process of him finding his past. He did not force, did not take over, and respected every life, even if it was his reincarnation. In such a private situation, he could still be serious and not bully others. What would happen if it was someone else? This was the test of the odd, righteous, pure land for him. This was definitely not the only way. Different people had different ways of testing. Not everyone had such a complicated experience in the past. The purpose of the Pure Land of Oddity was to catch the most critical flaw in each cultivator's state of mind and create a scene to test the cultivator's quality, to see if the cultivator was qualified to become an eternal immortal. Therefore, Qing Xian did not know where the so-called Qijing Pure Land was. It was just because he had never been there before. Just like how he had been there now, he would not tell anyone about it. The punishment for revealing heaven's secrets was very severe. Even if he told his friends, would it be a good thing? That might not be the case. On the contrary, he might be worried about personal gains and losses. The only thing he was curious about was the purpose of this exterior immortal. Such a complicated immortal technique couldn't be used so casually, right? Was this really a punishment? After cultivating for more than 2,000 years, he roughly understood some of the so-called immortal's basic principles. There was no absolute right, wrong, good, or bad. I'll give you a chance. If you pass, then it's fate. If you don't pass, then you deserve it because you're not qualified. You should be grateful for this opportunity, not the negative consequences that could be caused by the opportunity. If it were someone else, would they use such an immortal technique to waste time and energy? Therefore, it should be a kind of test with goodwill as the starting point. However, this kind of test was more cruel. There was a high probability that he would fail. He would not think that this was a malicious killing plot. If he thought about it this way, the path would become narrower and narrower. He looked at the time. As he expected, it was only a few moments. This time was basically wasted on reminiscing in the ordinary world. The real reincarnation time was only a moment. He was in a void that was very unfamiliar to him. He could not even find the familiar location of the main star. For a master of stars like him, who liked to travel around, if he still felt unfamiliar, this place should not be in the eastern heaven. He had a way to go back, but he had his own concerns. If he used the interior heaven as a transit, he would have to enter the interior heaven and accept the restrictions of entering and exiting. Using the exterior heaven was very attractive, but the problem was that the exterior immortal monarch was now paying attention to him. It might not matter if others used the exterior heaven as a transit, but it was too eye-catching for him. The most important thing was that he did not want to go back to the boring life of a sect leader so soon. Since he had come out, since he had so many reasons, he looked at the stars aimlessly all the way. He also needed some time to digest the changes that this experience had brought to him. He liked to float in the void and think about problems. His mind was much more sensitive than in the bounded domain. This was a habit that had been cultivated for more than 2,000 years and had been solidified. Looking at himself, the past was very clear and there was no suspense left. This was also what he wanted. The future of the universe would change very quickly, so he needed a solid foundation. His ego was complete, and he knew very well that his superego was still completing the final construction, so it would not take much time. In this way, he had already completed the foundation of immortal ascension. It was enough for him to deal with the next upper-level sun spirit, or to take the second step. In his self-reflection, a very strange thing appeared in his perception. He immediately understood what it was. Faith. After having an independent faith for nearly 1,000 years, he had a new faith, respect. Faith had always been insignificant in the process of his cultivation. Sometimes, He would even forget that he had such a thing. However, faith had always subtly influenced his way of doing things. For example, independence. It was this deep-rooted sense of independence that made him resolutely choose to sever his ties with the two special pasts. Even if he had to pay the price, he wanted to become an absolute and independent self. He did not want to live in the shadow of others, even if the shadow might be very great. The same went for respect. It had happened unknowingly and arrived. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, it was a matter of course and a matter of course. In the exterior realm, he was willing to take a strange risk and respect others. He would rather offend the immortals for the people on the list. In the odd righteous pure land, he respected himself. He would rather lose the past forever than to scheme for some seemingly insignificant reincarnation. Respecting others and respecting oneself was the respect of faith. It sounded simple, but it was very difficult to do it. He had two faiths. Lu Xiaoyi sighed with emotion. In fact, ever since he had obtained conviction, he had rarely used it in battle. Conviction had the miraculous ability to reduce defense by 10%, and now that he had two, he could reduce defense by 20%. This would play a decisive role in a battle between experts. The reason why he did not use it often was that the swordsman's fixed thinking was always afraid that he would become dependent on it. But now that he thought about it, he had worked hard to get it. It was not like he had stolen it or picked it up. Why should he be so stupid? With the improvement of the realm, it was not only knowledge that was opened, but also the mind. Chapter 1954. A strange phenomenon was that the things he was cultivating now had less and less to do with the sword. But because of this, his sword was becoming sharper and sharper. This was the true philosophy of cultivation. Sword Tao was not something to be taken out of alone. It was still within the entire Taoist system. When you felt that your swordsmanship had hit the ceiling and could not improve, don't be discouraged and practice something else. Tao state of mind, past, present, future, and countless other aspects. While he was strengthening himself, he was also strengthening the foundation of his swordsmanship. Tao is always interlinked. He now deeply understood this point. He began to contact the heavenly eyes. He had to check on the completion of this mission and his friends in the interior realm. If he was fine, they would certainly be fine. But he also wanted to know what changes there would be in the exterior realm after this. The heavenly eyes quickly replied. It was concise and comprehensive, with two main points. First, the heavenly eyes recognized the completion of the mission. In view of his disrespect to the immortals, the problem could have been solved through the heavenly eyes' immortal monarch. But in the end, he had to play the hero, which was suspected of playing to the gallery and caused a commotion in the exterior realm. So his merits offset his faults, and there was no reward or punishment. However, there was one condition, which was to keep his status as the enforcer of heaven's eyes. On the surface, it was to let the interior experts continue to pursue the evildoers who had escaped from the exterior. But in fact, it was also a kind of recognition and reward in disguise. It was just that he couldn't say it out loud, so as to avoid the immortal court forces behind heaven's eyes and exterior experts from causing trouble. This status had many uses. It was not completely an empty position. Pursuing the exterior realm monsters was a long process. If one day was not enough, he would be the enforcer for one day. Such measures made Lu Xiaoyi wonder which immortal monarch was behind the heavenly eyes' actions. It should be someone who had no prejudice against him, right? Secondly, when the exterior realm was really shaken, it was not the half-immortals who were shaken, but the exterior immortal monarch. It was said that there was a change of immortals. The heavenly eyes was a little vague about this and did not mention much. This was also the usual way of keeping things mysterious. The second point was very practical for him, because he could probably use some means to pass through the exterior realm. This allowed him to not lose his sense of direction. He began to consider whether or not he should take this opportunity to make a trip to the phoenix nest. After all, he was not the kind of person who would not admit his mistakes after putting on his pants. He had to at least meet Han Yin, even if it was as a friend. Just as he was thinking about his next destination, several cultivators surrounded him. They were all true monarchs. Moreover, he was just floating like a corpse. Others had thoughts, but he was just a corpse. It was normal for him to be blocked in this state. It was a little funny. How could he be targeted in such a strange place? Was it because he was too famous? Or was it because he was asking for a beating? Fellow Taoists, stop. You have entered our security zone. Please show us your background, orthodoxy, and roots. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly realized that he had stumbled into a fight. In the current cultivation world of the universe, chaos was everywhere and wars were frequent. It was just that there were very few fights as big as the one in Dongxiangshan. The battle of orthodoxy, the killing of the realm, the historical grievances, the gains and losses, everyone took this opportunity to settle it together. It was also a good way to avoid karma. He shook his head. He did not want to participate in such trivial matters. There was no end to it, and there was no right or wrong. Therefore, he said sincerely, I was thinking about something and went in the wrong direction. I'm sorry, I'll leave now. However, his politeness did not get the cultivators to bend the rules. This was normal. Some taboos could not be retracted just because he said that he went in the wrong direction. For example, Lu Xiaoyi entered the wrong senior sister's bathhouse. There were 4 people surrounding him. 2 of them were perfected lords, and 2 of them were Yuanying. Among them, the perfected lord of the essence soul realm looked at him with an amused expression. As a perfected lord of the essence soul realm, he felt that this unfamiliar cultivator was very strange. He thought that this was a hint from his intuition, an external sign that Lu Xiaoyi had something to hide. However, he did not know that this was actually Lu Xiaoyi's natural concealment of his own realm after he had perfectly established his ego. His half-immortal aura had changed. This was a sign that he was about to reach the upper realm. However, a sign was a sign. It was possible that he would reach the upper realm tomorrow. It was also possible that he would reach the upper realm in 1,000 years. Please show us your orthodoxy and background. Before this, you are a prisoner of the Alliance. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Actually, after becoming a half-immortal and having a plan for his future, he rarely killed people. This was because what he wanted to do in the future required him to have more friends and not enemies. However, this cultivation world was always full of helplessness. He still wanted to make one last attempt to redeem himself. No one can force me to say anything when I'm under duress, even if it's about what I ate last time. This is the basic right of a cultivator who walks in the universe. I'm not a prisoner either, before you prove your strength. The path of cultivation is about mutual respect. I understand this principle. Do you understand? The nascent soul cultivator sneered. Putting aside his strength and talking about his authority, he didn't know how he managed to get to this point. All right, I'll force you now. Your orthodoxy, your background, and what you ate last time. With a wave of his hand, he activated his Tao realm, and his spiritual pet spread its wings. The remaining 3 people also made their moves. He appeared to be very strong because this was the Alliance's territory. However, even so, he would still be very careful when dealing with a nascent soul cultivator who was like him. He would first use the Alliance's name to pressure him, then use words to confuse him. In fact, his purpose was just to occupy a position so that he could make the first move. He was very clear that words were useless. As long as he could take down this person, he would have the authority and the heavenly Tao. A flash of light streaked across the void. It seemed to be very far, but it also seemed to be very close. This wasn't contradictory, because that flash of light came faster than his mental reaction. He relied on his vision to see the flash of light from afar. He felt that the flash of light was very close because of his body's consciousness. When the sword aura exploded in his body, he knew that in the face of true power, all his little tricks were actually useless. Humans should learn to be respectful, especially cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the remaining 3 people indifferently. Humble, friendly. When you see a guest from afar, you should bring out your own wine and food. You should give good blessings and considerate help. You should even take out your more precious things. Yes, old witch. If that's the case, at least you won't say goodbye to this beautiful universe before the start of the Great Era. For example, I never ask people where they come from. Where are they going? Where's your home? What do you do? I only know how to say, hey, friend, you've been walking for a long time. Why don't you sit down and have a drink? If you have a good drink, what can't you say? Chapter 1955. The three cultivators from the so-called Alliance did not even dare to breathe loudly. Two of them were bodhisattvas, while the other was a small Buddha. Their strength was far inferior to the leader's vital spirit. They did not expect that their senior brother would die here, because they did not offer him good wine, food, and food. Most importantly, it was meaningless. They still did not know anything. Lu Xiaoyi found it strange that the three monks were so quiet out of fear. Even if there was a huge difference in strength, the first choice would be to scatter and escape. The universe was vast, and the chances of escape were high. There was no reason for them to be frightened by his pretentious words. The will of a cultivator was not so weak. He did not bother to investigate further. Then, if there is no wine, guests from afar can at least ask the host for directions, right? The three monks were even more bitter. They also realized their recklessness. This was a completely unnecessary conflict, but it could not be resolved. First of all, which sky is this? Under Lu Xiaoyi's abuse of power, Lu Xiaoyi quickly understood where he was. Western heaven, the airspace near the Scarlet Star. Yes, it was the sword vein that Tu Muyun asked him to take care of when he was in the exterior sword vein. It wasn't that he had forgotten. He just felt that in terms of importance, there was no need to rush over there. It wouldn't be difficult for him to find a suitable time when he was more familiar with the exterior heavens in the future. He would definitely come to the Western Elephant Heavens. He liked to gather more things and solve them all at once. This was definitely not a coincidence. Was it intentional by the exterior immortal monarch? Did Tu Muyun have something to do with the exterior immortal monarch? Or was there another reason? He could not guess, but one thing was certain. This could be a convenient favor. It was also another way to express that the exterior immortal monarch had no ill intentions towards him. The Scarlet Star was a very unique medium-sized region. It was full of spiritual vigor. Due to historical reasons, it was the sole orthodoxy of the sword vein. There were no orthodox Taoist or Buddhist temples on the planet. Of course, there was no space for heterodox sects to exist. Here, only the sword vein existed. There were many inheritances of the sword vein. The cultivators in the nearby regions rarely called them by their specific sections. Anyway, these swordsmen closed their doors and stayed together outside the region. Therefore, they were collectively called the Scarlet Swordsmen. Over time, it became an official name for them in the Western Heaven. The Scarlet Star's name had its origin. It was because the fire energy on this planet was abnormally strong. It was easy to imagine the connections of this orthodoxy in the Western Heaven cultivation world. Among the four quadrants of the universe, the Eastern Heaven was dominated by Taoists. Even the immortal monarch in charge was a Taoist, immortal monarch. In the Southern Heaven, there were more ancient, strange, and demonic beasts. In the Northern Heaven, it was the quadrant of innate and acquired spiritual treasures. Of course, there was a difference in the ratio. Human cultivators were still the dominant force. In the Eastern Heaven, Taoists were 60%, Buddhists were 30%, and the remaining 10% was equally divided between demonic beasts and spiritual treasures. In the Northern Heaven and Southern Heaven, the ratio of demonic beasts and spiritual treasures increased to 20% or 30%. In Western Elephant Heaven, Buddhism accounted for 50% of the population, Taoism accounted for 30%, and the remaining 20% was made up of all sorts of random forces. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for the Scarlet Star to survive for so long if they were not powerful enough. This was because the Buddhist inheritance was far more permeable than Taoists. It was all-pervasive and would take advantage of any gap. With such strength, it was easy to imagine the situation in the Western Quadrant, where Buddhists were the dominant force. They persevered for many years, But in the chaos of the universe and the change of the era, they had no choice but to face the most severe test since the establishment of their own sect. An alliance formed by the surrounding Buddhist forces used a groundless accusation as an excuse to follow the example of the Eastern Heaven Alliance and attack the Scarlet Star in the Western Heaven. The war had been going on for many years and was still in a stalemate. However, it was clear that it was only a matter of time before they failed to contend with the mainstream of the Western Heaven. This was also the reason why Tu Muyun was so worried in the exterior realm. Unfortunately, he could not return. Even if he did, what could he do? If he could return, a group of Western Heaven Buddhists in the exterior realm could return. They would not divulge the specific inside story, the formation of the alliance, the overall plan, and the progress of the war. All they talked about was the general and obvious things. Of course, with their status, it was impossible for them to know everything. The only one who knew more was the Buddha, who was killed by Lu Xiaoyi. This was not a small problem, but a big one. He had long been tired of attacking and defending the realm. He had played the 5 rings of the blue sky, Zhou Xian's defense, and Hung He's breaking the realm. In fact, it was very boring. He also did not think that it was meaningful for a demigod like him to get involved. Standing in this position, he should be able to see deeper and further. He also finally understood why these 3 people were afraid and did not run away. They thought that he was a master among the Scarlet Swordsmen. If you go back, how will you explain the death of one of your primordial spirits? Lu Xiaoyi asked with great interest. The remaining Buddha smiled bitterly. I'm afraid we can only tell the truth. Senior's death cannot be hidden from others. Even if the 3 of us die on the spot, everything that happened here will not be lost. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This was a small threat. Even ants would drag out their lives, let alone humans. Then, I have a request, and I hope the 3 of you can agree to it. If you agree, I am not a person who kills indiscriminately. If you don't agree, I will do as I please. The Buddha plucked up his courage. As long as it doesn't go against our Buddha's heart. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. What Buddha's heart and Tao's heart? It's just the human heart. I'm not here to ask you to betray anyone or do something that is contrary to the bottom line of a cultivator. What I mean is that you can go back and report the truth, but you must report it to the higher-ups. You can't spread this trivial matter all over the city. Just say that the interior Heavenly Lu brought a torture puppet to this region and was questioned by you, which led to these misunderstandings. Do you understand what I mean? The 3 monks were shocked. They did not know who Inspector Lu was, but they knew very well what kind of place the interior Heavenly Lu was. They interrogated the suspicious cultivators who passed by, but they did not expect to catch an interior demigod. No wonder their senior died so easily. He did not even have a chance to struggle. They knew very well what this demigod meant. If they wanted to escalate the situation, they should roll up their sleeves and treat him as the Scarlet Swordsman. If they did not want to escalate the situation beyond their control, there would be more to come. A foreign swordsman came here at the right time. Who would believe that he was just passing by? He must have come directly from the interior Heavenly Lu to end this war. The situation was getting serious. Chapter 1956. The Buddha felt that the burden on his shoulders was very heavy. He knew very well what it meant to be a half-immortal. When the universe entered the middle stage, half-immortal monsters appeared not only in the eastern sky, but also in the other 3 heavens. Because of the clash between the inner and western sky and the eastern sky, there were a few monsters of the interior level in the eastern sky. Therefore, the monsters of the exterior level, who were far ahead in terms of numbers, preferred to run to the northwest and southern sky. They subconsciously avoided the eastern sky, which was a tiger's den. Therefore, in the western sky, there were frequent rumors of half-immortals fighting with the cultivators of the main world. What was worse was that the young gods were at a disadvantage. As far as he knew, there were half-immortals in the Scarlet Red, but they were real half-immortals who could not come down. Therefore, when all half-immortals could freely enter and leave, the elimination of the Scarlet Red became the most important thing. This could take 1,000 years, or even less. All the arrangements were based on this, but now, a powerful half-immortal swordsman had appeared. What was hidden in this? Was it a coincidence? Was it deliberate? Was it an individual act? Or was it an outpost of the swordsman army? This was a matter of great importance. Don't worry, great immortal. We know the severity of the matter. We can't guarantee anything else, but we will definitely pass the news directly to the higher-ups of the Alliance. We won't spread it in advance. The three of them left hurriedly. It seemed that they were really anxious. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The situation forced him to reveal his identity. He had no choice. He liked to pretend to be weak. Even after becoming a half-immortal, he did not change this bad habit. However, he also knew that he had to look at the occasion. If he did not look at the time and place, and only showed his face for himself, this kind of trouble would only get bigger and bigger. Moreover, with his current status and reputation, there was really no need for him to pretend in the main world. Although the three monks did not speak clearly and did not tell the truth, some basic information could not be wrong. For example, the war had been going on for several years. For example, the battlefield had long changed from a territorial attack to a battle in outer space. In such a situation, great changes could happen at any time. Either the Crimson Sword sect would be destroyed, or the Alliance would suffer heavy losses. The hatred between the two sides would grow deeper and deeper. When the hatred between the two sides was irreconcilable, it would be impossible to resolve it. One side would have to be completely destroyed. This is the Western heaven. Can Buddhism be completely wiped out? Therefore, Scarlet's current situation was very dangerous. She had reached a point where she could not afford any delays. This was also not an occasion for him to pretend. When he first heard about this, he had a general principle in his heart. First of all, his participation could not change anything on the tactical level. This was not a conflict that could be solved by one person. Secondly, it was impossible for him to gather the swordsman army. The distance to do so could not be covered even in 1,000 years. Therefore, the only possibility was to reconcile the dispute between the two sides and see if they could reach a truce agreement that both sides could accept. He was a half-immortal, not a human immortal. It was impossible for them to guard this place forever. Such a guard was an insult to the sword range. War is the art of compromise. After reaching the half-immortal realm, he began to slowly wake up. There was no other way to stop this war immediately. The only thing he could do was to reveal his identity. He hoped that this would make this so-called alliance hesitate and buy him some time. As for now, he had to find the Scarlet Swordsman group as soon as possible. He had to set up a truce period between the two sides and try to reach a consensus during this time. Of course, the three monks did not know where the main force of the Scarlet Swordsman group was. They could only tell him the location of the Scarlet Star, and he had to find it himself. Hopefully, he could make it in time. Lu Xiaoyi was no longer floating like a corpse. He was flying at full speed. As he flew, he took out the star map that Tu Muyun had given him and compared it with the map. Finally, he found his position. There was still a month before the Scarlet Star. This field battle was quite bold. He didn't hide his figure, but swaggered and showed off his aura. Along the way, there were several patrol squads similar to the 4 people from before, but they didn't pose a threat to him. He just sped up and rushed over. His real goal was not to attract the attention of these monks, but to attract the attention of the Scarlet Swordsman. There was no way to find them in the vast universe. He could only let them find him first. This strategy was quite effective. Half a month later, he shook off a target who was trying to approach him from the side. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to test the waters. He swung his sword from afar, and the person immediately drew his sword to defend himself. Then, he suddenly turned around and tightened his sword. The person was already immobilized. From his appearance, he still looked like a monk. His Tao realm was mainly Buddhist. However, he was using a real flying sword. It was not a sword pill or a coiling sword, but a Zen sword. At first glance, he looked like a swordsman disguised as a monk. However, Lu Xiaoyi knew that he was not in disguise. This was because the famous Scarlet Swordsman in the Western Elephant Heaven was a Buddhist sword sect, who said that the swordsman had to be from a Taoist sect. He could also be from a Buddhist sect. In terms of breadth and depth, the Buddhist sect was not much worse than the Taoist sect. Since the Taoist sect had a sword that protected Tao, it was not surprising that the Buddhist sect could have a sword that protected Tao. Tu Miyun had vaguely mentioned this before. This was also the awkward part of the Scarlet Sword vein. To the Buddhist sect, they were a sword vein, but to the Taoist sect, they were monks. Neither side was good, and both sides were just eating melons. Life was also very hard. Lu Xiaoyi had consulted a few of his senior brothers in the exterior realm about this. He wanted to know their views on the Buddhist sword vein. In the end, he was deeply moved by Tingxi's words. Seeing is believing. It had been more than 10,000 years since Tu Muyun left the Scarlet Sword vein and came to the exterior realm. As he spent all his time in the clouds of the sword vein, he obviously valued his identity as a swordsman more than a Buddhist sect. Therefore, he was naturally a swordsman. However, no one could tell the exact situation of the Crimson Sword range. Therefore, he was told not to jump to conclusions in advance. Everything had to be seen first. The real sword range did not depend on where one's cultivation method came from, or whether one wore a monk's robe or a Taoist robe. However, one's heart for the sword could never be deceived. It was obvious at a glance. Lu Xiaoyi deeply agreed. It was precisely because of this sword vein orthodoxy of the Buddhist sect that he didn't feel too much of a sense of urgency. It was placed at the back of the schedule, but he didn't expect that it would be thrown here by an exterior immortal monarch. He had to do something about it. He did not rush to curry favor with the monk. Instead, he was indifferent. Are you a Buddhist or a sword vein? How could the monk not know his identity when he saw his attire? It was like a Chinese chef bumping into a Western chef. Although they were of the same trade, they had to ask about the cuisine first. If it was a half-cooked dish, he might not be able to get close to it. Chapter 1957. The Scarlet Swordsman was very careful. As a swordsman, he could clearly feel the strength of this fellow. We are from the Scarlet Zen Sword sect. But if you want to ask me which is more important, then of course, the sword is more important. Lu Xiaoyi did not comment. This was the reason why he had a headache over this place, and the reason why he could not rashly join in. If Wei Jianshan was here, he would have directly attacked the higher-ups of the alliance and killed them until they were convinced. But obviously, it was not so simple now. Whether they were willing to accept his help was another matter altogether. Tu Muyun had not descended to the mortal world for 10,000 years, and the situation there was constantly changing. There was a small change in 100 years and a big change in 1,000 years. What would happen in 10,000 years? If I say that I want to go to your secret gathering place, are you willing to lead the way? Lu Xiaoyi exuded the aura of a half-immortal, which was completely different from that of a young god. Although the monk's realm was not high, he was still a Yin god, Bodhisattva, so he immediately understood. His thoughts turned quickly. He considered the significance of the half-immortal realm, and then considered the style of the swordsman. He was also a decisive person, so he immediately made up his mind. If that's the case, I am willing to lead the way. He turned and leaped to the side, and Lu Xiaoyi followed closely behind. The sword Buddha had many questions. He wanted to know if this was a coincidence or the support of the Taoist sword sect with a purpose. In Western Elephant Heaven, the Taoist veins were weaker, not to mention the Taoist sword sect. There was no space for them to survive. In the Eastern Heaven, the Buddhist sect had no way to deal with these so-called lunatics of the Tao sword. Part of the reason was that their fighting strength was astonishing, but the bigger reason was that they were in a place where Taoism flourished in the Eastern Heaven. He had doubts in his heart. He did not know if the appearance of the swordsman of the half-immortal realm was a blessing or a curse for them. This mentality was impossible in other elephant heavens, but this was Western Heaven. Even if they were from the sword vein, they would never be able to erase the obvious Buddhist brand on them. What's your surname? Can you tell me the details of the battle? Lu Xiaoyi was very courteous. He was no longer the young and inexperienced person he used to be. The most obvious change was that he was more willing to think for others. In his opinion, the Xinyuan sword vein, or rather, the Taoist sword vein, was the authentic one. There was no doubt about this. However, it was possible to think so in the Eastern Heaven, but not necessarily in the Western Heaven. Perhaps people thought that the Buddhist sword system was the authentic sword vein system. The sword Buddha hesitated for a moment and decided to tell the truth. I'm Yutan, and I'm patrolling the distant region for the Crimson Buddha's sword vein. I'll tell you the truth. Yutan explained everything in detail, and Liu Xiaoyi finally had a general understanding of the world-ending war in Western Heaven. To be honest, both overtly and covertly, it was inseparable from the changes in Eastern Heaven. The time when the Crimson Star's abnormality appeared was a few hundred years ago. If one carefully calculated the timeline, it should be within 100 years after the First Great War of the Five Rings. The situation suddenly became tense. There was no special reason for it. The Crimson Star and the forces in the surrounding realms had always been on bad terms. After a long time, they were entangled in tension. Sometimes they fought, and sometimes they cooperated. Sometimes they fought, and sometimes they cooperated. It was not a big fight, and they did not cooperate. It was just awkward, and everyone made do with each other. Therefore, when the situation became tense, the Crimson Star did not pay too much attention to it. They were also very clear that when the universe changed and the era changed, the Western Heaven, like all the other heavens, was bound to undergo a reshuffling process to consolidate their position and eliminate dissidents. A nondescript orthodoxy like theirs was probably the first to bear the brunt of it. The Taoist forces in Western Heaven could not be moved by the Buddhists, just like how the Eastern Heaven Taoists could not move the Buddhists. Therefore, the most dangerous ones were not the Taoists, but the ones like them who did not rely on either side. To resist foreign aggression, one must first pacify internal affairs. Therefore, preparations have been made for a long time. For example, the distribution of seeds, the contraction of resources, the intensification of war preparations, and so on. The more difficult problem for them was how to find allies. It was too difficult. On one hand, it was because their swordsman characteristics were not liked by others. On the other hand, it was because the environment they were in was too awkward. They were different from the rest of the Buddhists. They were the Buddhists in the eyes of the Taoists. They were the orthodox among the unorthodox, and they were the heretics in the eyes of the orthodox. You haven't formed your own alliance for hundreds of years. Your relationship is... Liu Xiaoyi was speechless. Yutan looked ashamed. This is a problem left behind by history, and it has never been completely solved. In addition, we did not expect it to come so soon. We thought it would come at the end of the universe's transformation, but we did not expect it to come earlier. Moreover, we also have internal problems. Being in such a state of constant vigilance for a long period of time would cause one's perception of danger to be dulled. This was an unavoidable mentality. Moreover, they probably did not expect that everything that happened in the Western Paradise was actually closely related to the changes in the Eastern Paradise. The Buddhists were rebuffed in the Eastern Paradise, so it was normal for them to seek revenge or compensation in the Western Paradise. To put it bluntly, the Western Heavens Buddha sword vein was dragged down by the Eastern Heavens Tao sword vein. Liu Xiaoyi listened quietly. It was not convenient for him to ask some questions. Whether he said it or not depended on himself. If he was smart, he would solve it as soon as possible when the demigods came down. If he pretended to be stupid, he could only bear it himself. Yutan was a smart person. On the way back, he also weighed the whole matter. They needed help and external forces to intervene. They could not hold on by themselves. The war had been going on for several years now. To be able to hold on for such a long time in a war with such disparity in strength was not only because of their combat power, but also because of their correct battle strategy. From the beginning, they gave up on attacking and defending the realm. They gave up the Scarlet Star and destroyed the realm's grand membrane. The significance of this was that even if the realm was occupied by others, because the grand membrane was destroyed and the demigods could not come down to rebuild it, it would not be used as a tool by the Buddhists. Without the grand membrane, everyone could not fight a defensive battle. This was a very painful but very effective decision. All the Scarlet Buddha swordsmen, Yuan and above went out to the void of the universe to fight guerrilla warfare. Relying on their familiarity with the space, they came and went like the wind. They did not fight a decisive battle, but only harassed. This made the Buddhist Alliance unable to do anything. There were many strange techniques in the Buddhist Alliance, but the problem was that in a sense, the Scarlet was also a branch of the Buddhist Alliance. Therefore, they fought back and forth, and it became a terrible battle. If the Hengi realm had learned this move, it would have been troublesome for Liu Xiaoyi and the others. Unfortunately, in terms of battle, the people of Hengi realm were not as sharp as the swordsmen, even if this was a special Buddhist swordsman. However, this kind of fighting style would eventually be familiar to the opponent. The opponent was also familiar with the familiar space. With the gathering of the Buddhist Alliance's power, the Scarlet Swordsman's space to maneuver became smaller and smaller. They were also forced further and further away from the realm. Seeing that they were so powerless, there was a voice that said that they were going to fight a big battle, a reversal of the situation. But this was also what the Buddhist Alliance hoped for. Chapter 1958. Having made up his mind, Yu Tan decided to tell the truth. If you want someone to help you, you should at least tell the truth, right? It was simple logic. We can still hold on. Scarlet still has dozens of great Buddhas, hundreds of Buddhas, and countless Yuaning. They are also a force to be reckoned with, and have no problems in battle. Our problem comes from within. It's not about whether or not to go to war, but the direction of Scarlet orthodoxy. Since he had chosen to speak, Yu Tan spoke faster and faster, as if he would never finish. Scarlet is the Buddhist sword vein and cultivates the Zen sword. The so-called Zen sword is both Zen and sword. After tens of thousands of years, is Zen more important? Or is the sword more important? This has always been a debate within Scarlet orthodoxy. If we had chosen Zen, which is also a requirement of the Western Buddhist sects, then perhaps we would not be in this predicament. But this also means that one day, Scarlet orthodoxy will no longer live by the sword, and will become like other Buddhist orthodoxies, with many branches, each with their own Tao. The Zen sword is just one of them, and the proportion will continue to decrease. If we had chosen the sword, we would not have been able to avoid the suppression of the Western Buddhist sects. We may be swordsmen forever, but the biggest problem is how to survive, just like now. Liu Xiaoyi nodded. This was a bit like the Huashan sword sect and a master of Qi. Things were getting more and more complicated, and his head was hurting. What about history? Yu Tan explained. In history, the Scarlet Sword vein originated from a group of wandering swordsmen, but it was too far away to investigate. They took root in Scarlet orthodoxy, and because of the environment of the universe at that time, they began to fuse with Buddhism in order to survive. They fought and killed, and in the end, a genius swordsman created the Zen sword technique and finally established a foothold in Scarlet orthodoxy. But at the core, the sword was the most important and the Zen was the least important. That was the true philosophy of the ancestors. The so-called Zen was just a cover to fool the surrounding Buddhist sections. That was the original intention. But the original intention can change. Yu Tan sighed. The environment determines the orthodoxy. That is the truth. If the ancestors were to settle down in the eastern sky, it would definitely be a sword vein. However, once they set foot in Crimson, they would inevitably deviate towards Buddhism. In a mortal world, if this place doesn't want me, there will naturally be a place for me. Our ideals are different, so I'll just leave. But in the cultivation world, the place was bigger and the space was wider, but there was no place to stay, unless they leave the Western paradise. But you also know that when a Tao orthodoxy moves across the celestial realm, it is no longer a matter of injuring their muscles and bones. It is a matter of losing their arms, legs, and heads. He could only persevere here. In perseverance, when the pressure from Buddhism was greater, he would lean towards the direction of Zen. When the pressure was less, he would lean back towards the direction of the sword. However, being in the Western heaven, Buddhism was always under great pressure. It was under such imperceptible influence that the Crimson Orthodoxy started from the core position of the sword, to the rise of the Zen, and finally to a tie in the end, especially in the last 10,000 years, because the epic is about to change. This shift has become even more obvious. Yutan said hatefully, "We are very clear about the Alliance's intentions. It is not that they have set their sights on the Crimson Star, nor is it that they want to uproot us. What they mean is that they hope for the Zen to take over the dominant position in the Crimson Orthodoxy, slowly squeezing out the living space of the sword. Over time, the Crimson Orthodoxy will be completely assimilated into the power of Buddhism. At that time, it is hard to say if there will be any Zen swords left." Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but sigh. Another Tao Orthodoxy's tragedy. He could guess what would happen next. Originally, if there was no great change in the epic, such subtle changes would have happened in another 10,000 years. When the time came, the Crimson Orthodoxy would have been completely controlled by the Zen, and there would not even be any resistance. It would have been a natural change, and there would not even be a single Dharma assembly. This was the method that Buddhism was best at. They would not even have the strength to struggle when they realized what was going on. Perhaps there would only be a few old and young survivors singing sad songs, and they would not even be able to see the splash of water when they fell into the tide. On this point, even Taoism could not compare. In terms of ideology, Taoism was more tolerant. You just had to admit that you were a branch of Taoism. If you did not want to, you must become the orthodox Taoism, like the three pure ones, or Zhou-yi. Of course, there was also the determination of the founding ancestors like Emperor Xianyuan. They mercilessly extinguished all methods other than the sword. They did not give any chance for other ideologies to grow stronger. That was why there was the current Xianyuan. The Crimson Orthodoxy was not good. The environment was not good, and the founding ancestors were not firm enough. As a result, the loopholes became bigger and bigger, to the point that it could even compete with a mainstream sword. Originally, this should have been a natural transition process, but the epic change disrupted the rhythm of Buddhism's layout in the Western Paradise. In the two universe wars in the Eastern Paradise, Lu Xiaoyi's little shit stick made a commotion, completely messing up the already urgent rhythm. Buddhism had no choice but to follow this chaotic rhythm, and they could only take action in advance. In the Western Paradise, taking the Crimson Orthodoxy as an example, now was not the right time to take action. Originally, the Zen monks of the Crimson Orthodoxy could have peacefully transitioned after a few years. Now, with the siege of the Buddhist alliance, they were gathered together again. In the current situation, the heart of the sword was not dead yet. They would rather die than submit to the invasion of foreign enemies. After several years of war, the situation is not good. Morale has begun to drop, and there is no hope. At this time, the Zen school of thought has begun to rise again. After several years of war, the backbone of the sword school has suffered great losses. Under the contrast of power, the situation has begun to develop in an inexplicable direction. This poor monk is from the sword school. I admit that I am a monk, but I am also a swordsman. I do not wish for the future Crimson to become a completely lifeless Buddhist land, but there is nothing I can do about it. Staying in a secret base is too stifling, so I asked for this job to relieve my boredom. I did not expect to meet you, great immortal. Lu Xiaoyi roughly understood, but his headache worsened. Then, as a member of the Crimson Orthodoxy, if you had the ability to manage the entire situation, what would you do? Yuden was a little confused. Lu Xiaoyi was even more straightforward. Let's put it this way. Do you know Tu Muyun? If you were Tu Muyun from the exterior world, what would you do? Yutan was a little stuttering. Ancestor Yun is still alive? Lu Xiaoyi was impatient. He won't die for a while, but if he knew that you guys were so talkative and timid, he probably wouldn't have needed to ascend to immortality. He might as well have climbed the ladder and hung himself. That would have saved me a lot of trouble. You have to know that in the later period of the universe's chaos, even half-immortals could come down, including your ancestor Yun. You don't want him to see Scarlet in such an unlucky state where she can't even solve her own internal problems. do you? Chapter 1959. Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to remind him as the two of them traveled back and forth in the void. You just have to lead the way. Don't worry about whether someone is following behind you, understand? Only then did Yutan stop his meaningless attempts to scare himself. Thinking about it, what kind of abnormality would a half-immortal not be able to discover? More than 10 days later, the two of them passed by the Scarlet Star very close to it. Crimson, gorgeous crimson, bright red, red, red. These words were very appropriate to describe this celestial body. This was because the fire element energy on the celestial body was very strong, causing the entire celestial body to be in a state as if it was being burned by fire. But in fact, there were still humans living here. It was just that the number of humans here was not as high as that of a normal world. The physique of the mortals here was also different from that of a normal star field. They could not migrate and adapt to the environment here. This is the Scarlet Star, which is what the Scarlet people call it. But the Buddhists of the Western Paradise don't call it that. They call it the Red Lotus Domain, after the meaning of the Red Lotus Hellfire. Just this name alone is enough to place us in the Buddhist sect's hierarchy. If we comply with them, we can survive and preach here. If we don't, we will take back the Red Lotus Holy Land that originally belonged to the Buddhists. This has always been a saying, but recently it has become very popular. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. In fact, it's just a saying. If you take a fancy to it, you will be part of the Buddhist fate. That's all. After passing by, they gradually distanced themselves from the other side of the Scarlet Star. Yutan introduced, the Scarlet Star is now in the hands of the Western Paradise Buddhist Alliance, but this kind of occupation is meaningless in the short term. To change the influence of the Zen sword on the Scarlet Star is not something that can be done in a day, so we are not in a hurry to take it back. But if this goes on for a long time, the basic cultivation forces will not be able to continue. Then how long can we last? A few hundred years later, without a new generation of Yuanying to replace them, the current Yuanying can only wither away, except for a few upper-level perfected monarchs. The swordsman group that can fight will only be left with perfected monarchs. In another 1,000 years, perhaps only the primordial spirit and yang spirit will be left. What is the point of persevering like this? A month later, the two of them came to a comet and went in from the tail of the comet. This place was not bad. It was not suitable for large groups to fight, but it was very convenient for small groups to disperse and leave. Because of the comet's own characteristics, the Buddhist divine arts were not very effective here. Of course, the premise was that the strength of the Western Heavens Buddhist sect had to be careful of their own casualties. If they went all out, the huge disadvantage in numbers would never be able to make up for it. After entering Star Explosion, Lu Xiaoyi already knew where these Buddhist swordsmen gathered even without Yutan's guidance. He followed Yutan all the way into the depths, and more Zen swordsmen appeared in his perception. Because they were in the tail of the comet, there were no large meteorites for them to gather together. Therefore, they were basically in a group. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Although he did not know how much damage the Crimson Sword vein had suffered over the years, he did not care about the casualties. The swordsmen did not have the heart to kill, so why would they cultivate the sword? They should just pray to Buddha. Yutan brought a stranger back. This was not a new thing during the war. During the war, there was always a need for eyes and ears. No matter how indifferent he was, he still had some friends. He was a Buddha, so he knew what was important and had the right to do so. Yutan was still there reminding him, "Mighty immortal, I will lead you to the place later. Please don't be impatient. I will inform my senior brothers to come and see you." Lu Xiaoyi ignored his clamor. His time here was limited, so he did not have the time to do things slowly. The sooner he finished, the sooner he could relax. There was still a lot of bad debt waiting to be settled. As soon as the flying sword flew out, millions of sword lights formed a huge sword dragon that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It rampaged through the comet as if it was unstoppable. The comet dust and the small meteorites under the buttocks of the Zen swords were all scattered and smashed into pieces. The sword whistled, not like someone who came to help, but more like someone who came to destroy the place. How could Yutan stop it? In the midst of the awkwardness, he did not need to inform them one by one. From the Sun Spirit to the Yuanying and the Crimson Sword Vein, all of them were gathered here. Yuta knew that he might have gotten into big trouble. He seemed to be a very polite person. Why did he start to go crazy as soon as he arrived? He hurriedly went forward and used his fastest speed to explain everything to his senior brothers. Before he could finish explaining, he saw that his senior brother's eyes had already changed. When he turned back, a red stone sword was floating in front of the madman. The sword's letter was swallowing in and out, as if it was about to swallow someone whole. Few people with low realms, such as the Bodhisattvas, recognized this sword, but all the great Buddhas knew it. Everyone at the Buddha level knew that this was the inherited treasure of the Crimson Sword Vein, the lay sword. They were also known as the Three Stone Swords. One of them had disappeared with the first ancestor, and its whereabouts were unknown. Another one had been taken to the exterior realm by the ancestor Tu Muyun, and the last one had been placed in the Scarlet Star. Now, it was being carried around by Great Buddha and was being kept safe. Now that the stone sword was out, the sword box on the Great Buddha's back vibrated uncontrollably. It could not be controlled and soared into the sky. The two stone swords intertwined with each other, emitting a fierce light. The great and small Buddhas bowed down one by one. They paid more attention to etiquette than the Taoists. Then, it was the Bodhisattvas who came to their senses. Lu Xiaoyi did not feel guilty at all. Bowing to the stone sword was the same as bowing to him. It did not matter what they bowed to. The key was that it was useful. What was the use of bowing to old Tu? They still had to bow to him. He exhaled and said in a very vulgar manner, "Old Tu is dying. He can't come down himself, so he begged me to come down and wipe his ass. Now that I've taken a look, I see that all of you are leaking. Can you wipe it clean? It's better not to wipe it. Smelling is also a choice." The great and small Buddhas below were depressed. First, he was a half-immortal and had the confidence to be rude. Second, he was invited by the ancestor Yun, and the stone sword could not be faked. Third, they heard that the swordsman of the Eastern Heaven was classified as a heterodox sect. They were one of the most vulgar and one of the most vulgar in the universe. They were famous for being barbaric. If a person who was usually gentle spoke vulgarities, it must be because he was forced to do so. But if a man spoke vulgarities, it could be his catchphrase. Maybe it was a kind of friendly way of expressing himself. Everyone understood very well. The great Buddha asked sadly, "What happened to the ancestor Yin? Did he die of old age? Or was he killed by a traitor in the exterior realm? It looks like he will be able to come down in 1,000 years. This. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. "It's not what you think. If old Tu wants to become an immortal, how many thousands of years would it take for an immortal to appear? Isn't that the same as courting death? That's why I said he's dying. Let's not talk about someone who's dying. Now that the Scarlet Man is talking, who agrees? Who objects?" Chapter 1960. This was the typical behavior of a crazy swordsman. But Lu Xiaoyi had his reasons for doing so. In Xianyuan, Wei Sword Mountain, Firmament Sword Sect, and Wester Bright Sword Mansion, if he dared to be so presumptuous, he would have been beaten to a pulp. This was the essence of a real swordsman. He dared to draw his sword against anyone. But not here. Lu Xiaoyi knew that they lacked the basic essence, qi, and spirit after just one look. The people here did not need discussion and respect, but orders and power. Back then, when Tu Miyun had introduced his sect to him, he had also said that the Scarlet Sword Mountain Range was very respectful of their lineage and ancestors. They were very strict about rules. In order to make it easier for him to reach out, giving him the stone sword represented everything. It was a hot potato, but also a form of trust. Lu Xiaoyi did not want to use it. He did not want to keep a low profile and pretend to be stupid, then take out the stone sword to show off. There were many ways to pretend to be stupid. So were to show off first, and somewhere to show off all the way. Just feel good. This time, he did not have to keep a low profile, and there was a different kind of spirit. The scene fell into a dead silence. With Lei Jian and the swordsman around, everything should have been natural. But the problem was that this swordsman was not the Cloud Ancestor. He was not even the Scarlet Man. He was just a swordsman, and a swordsman at that. Then, could he entrust his life, too? Could he entrust the domain? Could he entrust his future? A great Buddha stood up and tried to soften his tone. We think that at least we have the right to know your plan, right? The situation of the Scarlet Man is complicated. Perhaps the great immortal does not understand? Lu Xiaoyi rejected. What do I need to understand? You all understand, but now you are reduced to hiding in the tail of a comet? My time is precious. Although I was entrusted by Tu Muyun, I do not have much time to care about your trivial matters. How about this? I'm not an unreasonable person. I'll set the time into 3 points. 1 year later, you have the right to decide whether to accept my guidance or not. 3 years later, you'll have the same opportunity. Then, 10 years later, but before that, you all have to treat me as your Cloud Ancestor. Is there a problem? In other words, he would be in charge of taking everything for a year. Then, everyone would judge based on the situation. This method was neither good nor bad. He could give face to the Cloud Ancestor and make his own decisions after a year. It was only a year, so there shouldn't be any major problems, right? The leader of the young gods was very cautious. May I know your name, Immortal? Where is the Immortal Village? Which orthodoxy is it? Lu Xiaoyi looked at them coldly. Lu Xiaoyi. The entire scene was silent, and not a single person dared to make a sound. Lu Xiaoyi's name had started to spread throughout the universe after the First Universe War, but it was mostly limited to the Eastern Elephant Sky and the Northern Sky. His fame was still within the origin world, so it was still considered normal. However, after the Second Universe War in the Eastern Sky, the speed of his fame expanded to a point where it was somewhat uncontrollable. This was because it involved the outer and outer scenic skies. The destruction of the Hung River realm was a warning to all the powerful realms. The collision between the inner and outer scenic skies had made him infamous in the half-immortal world. He had even reached the exterior enforcer level. He had shocked the unspeakable lands, vowed to hunt down the half-immortals who had committed crimes, and went against the immortal monarch. After doing such a big thing, he still retained the position of enforcer in the heavenly eyes. Was he going to be promoted to a permanent worker? The heavens really didn't have eyes. When all of this was combined with the things that this person was showing now, it seemed normal. Such a person should have such a domineering aura. If he were to say something soft, would he still be Lu Xiaoyi? As the leader of the Origin World swordsman system, no. Now, he might even have the inner and outer scenic skies. With this person in charge, Scarlet should still have hope, right? This was the thought of the hot-blooded people, but rational people wouldn't think so. In the cultivation world, the strength of an individual couldn't be compared to the strength of a group. He wasn't the only half-immortal who could come down. There were many. 1 or 2 of them might not be his match, but what about 8 or 10 or more? In the First Universe War, he was famous because he had the swordsman army under his command. He relied on the strength of a group. In the Second Universe War, it was even more exaggerated that he could destroy a world. The lineup of 300 sun gods was still the strength of a group. In the collision of the inner and outer scenic skies, there were 4 inner scenic skies and 50 evildoers following. It was still the strength of a group. The outer scenic sky of the enforcers and dozens of enforcers were forever the strength of a group. This was the essence. People always like to see things on the surface of hot-blooded impulses, but the truth hidden under the surface was what made people alert. So now, where was the strength of a group? Just based on the defeated soldiers of the Scarlet Buddha, Sword Vein? It might be strong enough for a realm, but for an alliance, especially an alliance like the Buddhist sect, it was like a firefly to the bright moon. There was no comparison, even if the firefly was guided by a lantern. The matter was settled for the time being. The Scarlet Swordsman recognized the 1-year limit. Just based on the name Lu Xiaoyi, it was worth it. At the very least, the battles he led didn't seem to have been defeated. From the beginning to the end, Lu Xiaoyi didn't mention a word about the battle of the Zen sword in Scarlet. He couldn't mention it. How could he mention it? This wasn't something that could be solved by talking. He could only rely on fighting. Blood. Everyone dispersed in excitement. Only the two great Buddhas didn't leave. I'm Dragon Pool. Greetings, Enforcer Lu. I'm Zhao Jian. Greetings, Enforcer Lu. There was no need to guess. They must be the leaders of the Zen and Sword factions. Judging from their auras, Long Tan was from the Sword faction and Zhao Jian was from the Zen faction. They didn't try to hide it, but Lu Xiaoyi deliberately ignored them. There are two things to do now. The two great Buddhas wanted to get close to him, but they didn't expect Enforcer Lu to be so resolute. They hurriedly replied, "Please speak, Enforcer. We'll obey." Lu Xiaoyi stretched out a finger. "First, from today onwards, all Scarlet Swordsmen are only allowed to enter and not leave. Try to recall the scattered patrolling outside. Can you do that? Was this the rhythm of a big war?" The two great Buddhas were excited and worried, but they didn't show it. At their level, shrewdness was necessary. They couldn't see anything now. Even if there was a problem, they would have to wait until they had some clues. He stretched out a second finger. "Do you have some kind of connection with the Western Heaven Buddhist Alliance? Direct or indirect?" Zhao Jian nodded. "Yes, indirect means some forces are negotiating with each other and taking on some things that neither side wants to do personally, such as the exchange of prisoners of war." Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "Okay, don't give up on this line. Within 10 days, we have to make sure this line is unblocked." Dragon Pool and Zhao Jian looked at each other. They were both very surprised. This was basically saying that there would be news? What kind of news would it be? News of the Alliance gathering, or some other unexpected surprise? This line had always been unblocked. This was also the norm in the war between cultivators. They could avoid some situations that neither side wanted to see. Just like when Heaven's Choice and Zhou Xian fought, it didn't affect the upper echelon's communication. Chapter 1961. Just as Lu Xiaoyi and Yu Tan were hurrying back, several great Buddhas on the Scarlet Star were in a solemn mood. A piece of bad news that could not be any worse had disrupted their overall plan. Monk 5 Dynasties, a great Buddha, was the leader of this alliance. He was highly respected, experienced, and had unfathomable strength. The power behind him was also incomparably strong. His name was Great Holy Heavens, and was one of the few great realms in the western sky that could compare to the top realms in the eastern sky. His realm did not join the alliance. The reason was simple. It was not that he did not want to join, but he could not. The distance was too far, just like the distance between the 5 rings of the eastern sky and Zhou Xian. No matter which realm it would be troublesome to travel for hundreds of years. However, the alliance this time was indeed formed by his realm. It was because of his deep connections, powerful background, and the vision of the Buddhist forces around the Scarlet Star. Scarlet Star was located in a region where there had not been any powerful realms in the past hundreds of years. However, there were many mid-sized realms like the Scarlet Star. This time, under the leadership of the Great Sage Heavens, they had finally formed a regional alliance. To be honest, it was not easy at all, because it was difficult to reconcile everyone's needs. The cake was only so big. It was inevitable that there would not be enough to go around if too many people came. Right now, the alliance was more agreeable to the distribution plan. None of them were willing to submit to each other. Thus, the great Buddha of Great Holy Heavens was the leader. This was also a method. The only shortcoming was that this leader did not have his own strength. Fortunately, the Scarlet Star was not so strong that it could not be shaken. They could still fight the war. However, the war did not go well from the start. Although the Scarlet Star was a Buddhist swordsman, since they were swordsmen, they were full of intuition towards battle. They were prepared early on, and their strategy was very targeted. They directly gave up on the Scarlet Star, causing the Alliance army to rush over empty-handed. There were no secrets in large-scale cultivation wars. This was the truth, whether it was the eastern sky or the western sky. Once the rhythm of the war entered guerrilla warfare, there was no possibility of a quick victory. This was destined to be a grinding war, which made many of the Allied forces very unhappy. After all, not everyone was willing to drift outside for so many years and have a lot of things to do at home. Scarlet was not the only opponent in the Western Heaven. There were many similar undisciplined and heretical forces. The most important thing was that the forces of Taoism were their real enemy. This would never change. Lu Xiaoyi? Is that shit stir from the eastern sky here? What should he do? After stirring up their own shit, they went to stir up their neighbor's shit? A great Buddha was very depressed. There was no way he wouldn't be depressed. If it was a half-immortal, they would not be too afraid because they can also find half-immortal helpers. But Lu Xiaoyi is different. Perhaps it will be very difficult to find a half-immortal who dares to compete with him. He couldn't look for interior masters at all. As for exterior masters, they were either people who admired him or those who were wanted. Either way, they weren't suitable. If we can't find anyone in the half-immortal realm who can contend against him, we will be in trouble in this war. Why don't we use the sun god to push him up? This was also a method, although it was a bit embarrassing. Moreover, doing so was destined to have a considerable loss of sun god. That shitstir was famous for being ruthless. Before he became a half-immortal, the number of sun god resentful spirits in his hands was already more than 10. He perfectly inherited the killing methods of the great demon in Xuanyuan's sword vein. In the cultivation world, they were most afraid of this kind of person. Once an individual's strength broke through a certain limit, even if they were alone, there was really nothing you could do to kill a top cultivator in a realm. They were really not to be offended. The monk of the 5 dynasties waited for everyone to complain and find nothing. Only then did they look at him and speak. Lu Tixing? Is it him? Who can be sure? Have any of you seen him? A little Buddha with limited experience and 2 frightened bodhisattvas. Let us be in a state of panic? Seeing everyone pondering, the 5 dynasties felt disdain in their hearts. These guys from small places did not have enough experience and courage, and their strategies were even more limited. This kind of situation would be really difficult to withstand in the future changes of the universe. He reminded them, why must we target him? Why must we seek the help of our half-immortals? This is the war of the origin world. Can a half-immortal really be involved in it and create endless killing? We are not from the Hung River realm. We are not heretics. We are also the mainstream of the universe's cultivation world. The karma involved in this is very big. Seeing that the monks were deep in thought, he continued, we will pretend that we don't know. We don't know that there is such a person. We don't know who he is. What is his purpose here? We don't know at all. Just continue to fight us. I don't believe that he can really stay in the Scarlet Swordsman group forever and then keep killing our bodhisattvas and Buddhas. If that is really the case, we don't even need to do anything. Heavens, I will first restrain him. The monks suddenly understood. A great Buddha said with a smile, Master's view is really high. When he comes back, I will let the 3 disciples who met him by chance return to the realm. If there is a day when we confront each other, we will pretend to be lost. The universe is vast, and there are countless accidents. Who can say for sure? 5 dynasties nodded. Exactly. This person purposely spread the news that he is Lu Xiaoyi. What's his purpose? Doesn't he want us to take the initiative to contact him? Once we contact him, we will immediately lose the initiative. How can we talk? How can we talk? How can we continue to fight? If the tempo runs through his side and involves the inner and outer realm, we will find out as we talk. What? There is nothing for us to do. Is this what you want to see? Why don't we just pretend to be deaf and dumb? Do what you have to do. Not only do you have to do it, you have to do it on a grand scale. Let's see how he fights against the army of cultivators with his own strength. If he wins, he will kill countless lives and destroy his Tao path. If he loses, his reputation will be ruined and his face will be lost. What will we lose? We are all ordinary cultivators of the origin world. We are neither half-immortals nor monsters. There is no need to be so particular. The monks clapped their hands and cheered, as expected of a senior monk of the great sage heavens. His act of pretending to be deaf and dumb was deep in karma. A great Buddha asked, Master 5 Dynasties, what do you mean by war? Are we not going to waste their time? 5 Dynasties sighed. If this person doesn't come, it doesn't matter if we waste the time of those rats. Let them eat more wisdom dust in star explosion. Their morale will be even lower. The reason why we don't fight is because we are not willing to suffer too many losses. But that was then, and this is now. The situation has changed, so we naturally can't stick to the rules. This person's thoughts are unpredictable and cunning. If we wait for a long time, who knows what kind of tricks he will come up with? Why don't we take advantage of the time when he has not stabilized his footing and the situation is unclear to strike star explosion? We will go all out and lose more people to make him helpless. If we drag this out too long, it will be disadvantageous to us. Chapter 1962. There were some great Buddhas who were dissatisfied. Of course you don't care. There's no one from the great sage heavens. Thus, he tactfully suggested, do you want to reconsider? After all, the universe is changing and people are valuable. The 5 Dynasties knew that he had to persuade these people. Otherwise, when this sh*t Lu came, who knew what kind of trouble he would cause? There are many reasons, tactical and strategic. Everyone is smart and can see it clearly, so I won't say more. I will only say one thing, the movements of the Taoists in the Western paradise. Looking at the serious expressions on everyone's faces, he knew that this was the most important point. In a realm war, the Taoists have always been a hindrance. This is not only to prevent these heretical sects from being destroyed, but also to help them when they are attacked. In the Western paradise, it is impossible for us to attack both the Taoists and the heretical sects at the same time, so this bad habit has formed. When we attack the heretical sects, the Taoists will leak information from the back and make all kinds of small movements. When we attack the Taoists, these heretical sects will jump up and down and make all kinds of trouble. This has become the cancer of the Western paradise. What he said was very true, and it was indeed so. However, this was the environment. When the boss wanted to deal with people, the subordinates would naturally choose to band together. It was the same in the Eastern paradise. The Taoists were the strongest, but the cancer became the Buddhists and the heretical sections. Cancer also depended on the environment, and under different circumstances, it could become benign. The mustard worm disease is originally not surprising, but after this person comes, some fundamental things may change. The great name of Lu Xing is not only known in the sword vein, but also in the Taoists. It is a bit of a bootlicker. If he were to take the lead, the previous small skirmishes and disturbances would most likely evolve into a true alliance. When the Orthodox school and the Taoist school join forces, have you thought about the consequences? The 5 Dynasties waved his hand. Therefore, we don't have time, so we can only end this quickly. Strive to give Scarlet a fatal blow before this person spreads his influence completely. Some losses had to be endured, and it was impossible for them to fight steadily and surely like before. If you're willing, I will personally arrange this battle. If not, it is better for everyone to make plans early and simply make peace. That way, we won't be able to get out of this embarrassing situation if the losses are too great. Silence. The words of the 5 Dynasties could not be regarded as alarmist talk to scare people. There was a very profound reason behind it. That sh*t Stick Lu had ascended high and shouted that he wanted to carry out a color struggle in the Western paradise. Let's not talk about whether it would succeed or not, but the Western paradise would definitely be stirred up into a puddle of shit. The stench was overwhelming and intoxicating. The 5 Dynasties looked at everyone's expressions and calculated in their hearts. Actually, there was a very important reason that he had not said yet. The reason he had attacked Scarlet in advance was because he had been invited by the Eastern Heaven's Buddhists. Due to the failure of the Eastern Heaven, the Buddhists had placed all their resentment on the 5 rings, especially the sword vein. They couldn't do anything to Xian Yuan in the Eastern Sky because the Taoist alliance in the Eastern Sky was stable and unassailable. Therefore, They could only set their sights on the other mammoths. Among the four heavens, the western heaven was the most suitable. Buddhism was the strongest, and there was also the crimson sword vein, which was not weak at all. This was the reason why the great sage heavens couldn't say anything about this alliance. If there was a ghost in his heart, then no matter what he saw, there would be a ghost. The moment this sh*t Lu came, the five dynasties' first thought was that this bastard was here to take revenge on the Buddhists. He was here to cause trouble on purpose, to stir up sh*t. Now that he had come across a huge sh*t pit like Scarlet, it would be strange if he didn't want to stir this sh*t pit into a lake. Since they couldn't directly destroy him, they could only take drastic measures and clean up the sh*t pit that was Scarlet first. Since my great sage Heavens is the leader of this alliance, we will naturally not stay out of it completely. How about this? My great sage Heavens will appear and contact a few half-immortals to be in charge of restraining this person during the Battle of Star Explosion. This way, you will only need to deal with the Scarlet Swordsman. You don't have to worry too much about the killing power of this sh*t Lu. You will be able to reduce the casualties to an acceptable level. If you're unwilling to go all out with such conditions, I think there is no need for this alliance to exist anymore. The expressions of the monks shook. After talking for so long, this was the most realistic sentence. However, there was still a great Buddha who was not at ease. I wonder where the half-immortals' reinforcements are? How long will it take for them to arrive? The five dynasties disdained these useless people and replied, "Actually, these reinforcements are nearby. This is just a precautionary measure. How can my great sage Heavens not consider everything before doing things?" Only then did the monks let go of their worries. If there was someone specifically targeting that sh*t Lu, they were willing to bear the remaining losses. After all, how could there be no losses in a long expedition? The five dynasties' threat of Taoism was not false. It really existed and was not an exaggeration. Seeing that everyone nodded in agreement, the five dynasties smiled and said, "The Scarlet Swordsman thinks that he is familiar with the terrain and can hide in the star explosion without anyone noticing. Actually, he doesn't know that we have long known their movements and we're just waiting for the right time. Now that the time has come, everyone, let's close the door and beat the dog." Beating the dog was not easy. The key was whether they could close the door. There were too many doors in the universe. Luckily, they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. As long as they were willing to pay the price, war was like this. It was always constantly challenging your bottom line. At first, they thought that they could do it without bloodshed. Later, it became a guerrilla war. Now, it became an encirclement war. Their tolerance for casualties was also getting looser and looser. They hoped that they would not relax until they could leave alive. The uniqueness of the Scarlet Sword vein was troublesome for the Scarlet Swordsman, but wasn't it the same for their enemies? They wanted to use it for their own use, but they also wanted to peacefully pass through it. They also wanted to show off their strength. The result of having too many ideas was that none of them could be realized. It was better to kill them as if they were mortal enemies from the beginning. The two universe wars in the eastern sky had already passed several hundred years ago. However, there are not many people who could really learn anything from it. At least, the Western Sky Buddhist sect did not learn anything. The alliance began to mobilize. This was also a process that required time. However, according to the five dynasties analysis, even if that sh*t Lu's journey was smooth sailing without any delays, it would still take more than a month from the time they discovered him to the star explosion. Therefore, they had enough time to mobilize. Perhaps they could even catch up to the star explosion before he found the Scarlet Sword vein. Under such expectations, the entire alliance's movements were quite fast. The Buddhist sect forces of all the domains surrounded the star explosion from afar. By the time the army formation was perfect and the preparation conditions for the attack were met, only a month had passed. The five dynasties swept away their previous dissatisfaction. The Buddhist sect forces' actions when they saw danger were still remarkable. This was the foundation of success. Everyone, don't worry. The half-immortals are already in place. You can attack as you please. On the horizon, there were 3 indistinct auras. They were half-immortals. This was undoubtedly a reassuring pill, giving the forces of the Alliance a great deal of confidence. This time, the Scarlet Swordsman would not be able to escape. Chapter 1963. Lu Xiaoyi was inspecting the Crimson Sect's martial arts heritage, claiming that he was trying to find a way to get the best of both worlds. In fact, he was secretly learning from them. It was necessary to secretly learn from the Crimson Sect because the martial arts here were all authentic Buddhist martial arts, and most of the Tao states were also authentic Buddhist Tao states. For example, he was unfamiliar with the Yin virtue, good fortune, nirvana, karma, and so on. These are the most common Tao states here. To him, this was a treasure trove. Such a good thing could not be found in the 5th ring. Since he was a swordsman and a monk, there was no pressure to secretly learn from them. Well, it was not stealing, but he was guiding them in their cultivation as a friend of the Crimson Cloud ancestor from the upper realm. Of course, he had the qualifications and the ability to do so. He was a little weak in the Tao states of Buddhism, but he had a basic understanding of them. However, his understanding of the sword was 10 times better than these people. Just a few words of advice would be enough to make these great Buddhas feel infinitely better. Who would have thought that a demigod could secretly learn from them? However, Lu Xing knew how to do so. Under his unfathomable gaze, the Crimson Swordsman took out their trump card and showed it to this young senior, just to get 1 or 2 pertinent comments. Most importantly, Lu Xing did not hide anything. His comments were always sharp and accurate, and the advice he gave was even more imaginative. Not taking shortcuts was not only brilliant, but also practical. This made the Crimson Swordsman completely addicted to it. They could not wait to show everything they had to get guidance from a demigod who had already proven himself on the cultivation stage of the universe. This was very important. In these 10 days, the Buddhas surrounded Lu Xing just like that, as if they had forgotten that they were still in the middle of a war, and treated this place as a Zen sword gathering. They gained a lot. However, on the 10th day, Longdon could not hold it in anymore. Seeing that his fellow disciples were so immersed in the Zen sword that they had all forgotten their original purpose, he asked, "Inspector, 10 days have passed, and there is no news at all. Do you think we should take the initiative to contact them?" Lu Xiaoyi was in the mood to steal, and he did not expect 10 days to pass in the blink of an eye. It's already been 10 days. There is no news at all. Zhao Jian stood up. "I am in charge of external communication. Over the past 10 days, we've sent a few more people to contact you, but there's really no valuable information. It's all the usual stuff, and none of it is what you're looking for. Inspector, can you give us a direction so that we can pay attention?" Lu Xiaoyi thought for a moment. "No, if there is nothing, then there is nothing. Actually, I don't know what news there is. Tell everyone to gather. Xin Yuan won't take more than 10 breaths. What about you?" Dragon Pool raised his eyebrows, showing no sign of weakness. "Don't worry, Inquisitor. Our Crimson Sword Mountain won't be any slower." The Crimson Swordsman was Zhao Tuz's swordsman and swords S, Zhao Jian. They quickly gathered and lined up neatly. After more than 20 breaths, all the Crimson Sword cultivators, 15 great Buddhas, over 60 medium Buddhas, close to 200 small Buddhas, and close to 1,000 Bodhisattvas were all waiting for orders in the air. In terms of scale, they were not inferior to Xin Yuan, but they were inferior in terms of foundation and individual strength. These Zen swordsmen were on par with normal monks and Taoists of the same realm, but they did not have the indomitable momentum, and they did not have the foundation to kill enemies of a higher realm. Among the orthodoxies in the mid-sized domain, this was considered pretty good. The great Buddhas were very puzzled. Was he going to lecture them, to encourage them, or to make arrangements for the next phase of the war? Inspector Zhao had not come into contact with any battlefield information in these 10 days. He was even more clueless about the situation between us and the enemy. He did not even bother to look at the nearby star charts. He only focused on teaching everyone to practice the sword. He might be a good swordsman, but he might not be a good commander. Unclear about the enemy and us. Unclear about the situation. This kind of performance seemed to be inconsistent with his great achievements in the eastern sky. Everyone was guessing his intentions, but who would have thought that Inspector Liu would not say a word? He straightened his body and left, leaving only one sentence. "Follow me." They were somewhat baffled, but since he had said that the first year's activities would be arranged by him, they still had to comply on the surface. The 15 great Buddhas followed closely by the big and small Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. When the thousands of great cultivators were pulled together, an imposing aura spontaneously arose. Everyone looked at each other, not daring to ask, only blindly following. The speed inside the star explosion could not be increased. After 2 hours, they came out of the star explosion into the void of the universe. And Inspector Liu suddenly accelerated. This was no longer a patrol, but a rapid march. The speed was set at the maximum limit that the Crimson Bodhisattvas could bear. 2,000 people started running, and the atmosphere suddenly changed. What was the meaning of this? No one knew. Longtan Zhaoyang did not say anything when he saw it, only telling them not to fall behind. Whoever fell behind would be killed. This was no longer just a training exercise. In such a dreary march, Inspector Liu flew at the front from beginning to end. His direction was stable and unwavering. Obviously, this was not a coincidence. After running for 3 whole months, everyone was endlessly depressed. Their hearts were filled with pent-up anger, but they did not know where to vent it. A great Buddha asked, This is not bringing us back to the eastern sky, right? We're being naturalized? You didn't even inform us?" His thoughts were very universal, but also somewhat nonsensical. If they were really going to travel far away, they should go through the reverse space and take a large floating raft. Just like if a group of hoodlums went to another city to kill people, they would have to take a plane or a bus. Only when they went to the next street to kill people would they run with such an imposing aura. So, it seemed very contradictory. At this time, a weak voice rang out. It was Yutan, the Buddha who had led Inspector Liu back. I think, Inspector Liu's goal should be the Fate Awakening realm." Zhaoyang shouted sternly. "Why do you think so? Why didn't you say so earlier?" Yudin was very aggrieved. "I didn't know at first. When I sent Inspector Liu back, he asked me about the main boundaries of the Buddhist alliance, so I pointed it out to him on the star map. At that time, I just thought that Inspector Liu wanted to familiarize himself with the environment and opponents. Now, looking at this direction, we have been running for 3 months, so it must be the Fate Awakening realm. Inspector Liu is bringing us to the 5th ring to do business and slaughter the major realms of the alliance. There was no need to think, it must be so. This was the business that the 5th ring was most familiar with for tens of thousands of years. Slaughter the universe. It was just that previously it was in the eastern elephant sky. The other 3 elephant sky were still out of reach. Now, they were spreading their experience to the western elephant sky. At this time, Liu Xiaoyi's divine sense entered the minds of everyone in the team. Goal, Fate Awakening realm. I will open the world's great membrane for you. Goal, kill F***Kurs, rob F***Kurs. Swordsmen should be unrestrained. Chapter 1964. Zhao Jian was shocked. Enforcer, you can't do that. With such barbaric behavior, Scarlet and Western Heavens Buddhists will have no room to maneuver. Even if we want to become stray dogs, we can't do it. Liu Xiaoyi did not slow down. He could already see the vague outline of the Fate realm in front of him, and it was gradually becoming clearer. He smiled ferociously and reprimanded loudly. Do you know why Xin Yuan, who is also a sword vein, is doing so well in the Eastern Heaven, and the Taoists can only tolerate and rely on him? But you, Scarlet, are doing so cautiously in the Western Heaven, hiding your head and shrinking your tail, and the Buddhists want to destroy and control you? Just a little. When I, Xin Yuan, established my sect, I was always ready to perish together with anyone who came to attack me. If you bite me once, I'll bite you back 10 times. If you destroy my sect, then we can all forget about it. Because of this, after so many tens of thousands of years, fewer and fewer people dared to bite me, Xin Yuan. On the contrary, there were more and more people who showed goodwill. And we all had Tao veins and improved together. You have to throw caution to the wind first. Then there will be a future. Otherwise, you will be like now, being chased around like a dog. If you go to the eastern heaven and ask around, only I, Xin Yuan, chase people away. When has there ever been a case of someone else chasing Xin Yuan away? You still want to become a stray dog? How dare you say that? A sword vein can become a vicious dog, a mad dog, or a dead dog, but you can't become a stray dog. If you run this time, you're destined to run forever. His roar made the Scarlet Swordsman blush, and they were all ashamed. Shame and ferociousness appeared at the same time, and they only felt that a mouthful of resentment was about to spew out. Seeing that the Fate Realm was close, he pointed his hand, and millions of sword lights rushed out. The 5 grand Tao realms rotated, digging a big hole in the world's great membrane. The boundary shook, and the spiritual opportunity suddenly changed. He pointed at the big hole. You are not qualified to be called swordsman now. If you want to be a swordsman, first be a robber. If you don't blacken first, how can you bleach? Get down, all of you. Don't come up until you've dyed your battle robes red and filled your storage rings. Lu Xiaoyi's words were a little too much. It was normal for the Crimson Swordsmen to fight and kill. Since they were able to cultivate the way of the sword, their bloodlust would definitely be much greater than that of other orthodoxies. Under Lu Xing's disdainful gaze, the swordsmen did not hesitate to dive into the hole in the macrocosm. For several years, many of their fellow disciples were killed in battle. Their homes were destroyed, and it was difficult for them to return to their homeland. If they threw away the scruples of not tolerating Buddhism in the Western Paradise, what else could they not do? The Sword faction was in the lead, but the Zen faction had no choice. In the surging flood, how could they give you time to think carefully? A Zen great Buddha was still pacing back and forth at the entrance of the cave when he was kicked in by Lu Xiaoyi. He scolded, "What are you thinking by blocking the latrine door and thinking about life? If there's another one, I'll stab him with my sword." Without exception, all the Crimson Swordsmen were chased into the Fate Awakening realm by him. But he did not go in himself. This was not his battle, and the Crimson Swordsman could only rely on himself. Moreover, he had to be on guard against existences that were beyond the scope of the main world, such as half-immortals. The Fate Awakening realm was one of the main forces of the Alliance. In fact, in terms of realm strength, it might not be as strong as the Crimson Swordsman, but it was a lineage of Buddhism. Half of its combat strength had left after participating in a battle, and it was only a portion of its combat strength. It was easy to imagine the remaining strength. Ransacking the realm was not a problem, but the problem was whether or not one's heart could be as hard as iron and merciless. There was a paradox. The more you cared about the suffering of the people, the more likely you were to kill. In the end, you would suffer unnecessary losses and your opponents would be slaughtered. This was because you left a false impression on your opponents that they could resist. The correct idea was to intimidate the enemy from the start and use bloodshed to suppress them. The advantage of this was that many people with weak wills would choose to compromise, retreat, and protect themselves. They would not be able to kill many people. This was the experience of a fifth ring swordsman. As long as no half-immortals appeared, he would not make a move, even if the Crimson Swordsman suffered heavy losses. Judging from the current situation, the process was not going well. The Crimson Swordsman was not ruthless enough and could not intimidate the situation. Therefore, the resistance was very intense, and they were in a stalemate. Even though they had the advantage in numbers, they still fought to this extent. The key was not strength, but mentality. The Crimson Swordsman was not mentally prepared to be a competent bandit. There was no time to slowly polish this, and he could only learn through actual combat. Now was the best opportunity. At the very least, they still had the advantage in numbers. In the end, even if they had fewer people, they would still be able to attack fiercely. Unable to attack? Then he would just destroy the sect. There was nothing he could not accept. For a sect like the Swordsmen, if you could not even pretend to be tough, then what was the value of your existence? Just like a street gangster, you could not just bully people with a body full of tattoos. You had to fight bare-chested in a few rounds. This was what he could do for the Crimson Swordsman. He still hoped that the sword vein would be controlled by the swordsman. In fact, when he went to the tail of the comet, he already had this idea, so Yutin's guess was right. The reason why he waited for 10 days was to wait for the Western Buddhist sect's response. If they knew that he was coming, they would have to have an attitude. He did not know much about the Western Buddhist sect, so he could only test them like this. If the Alliance was smart enough, whether they invited the half-immortals to mediate, or if the Alliance simply came forward to sit down and talk, this war would probably end there. Although the process was easy, it was not good for the Crimson Swordsman. He could not stay here forever. After he left for a few hundred years, the contract binding would become powerless, and the next attack would not be as wishy-washy as this time. The Crimson Swordsman was the real danger. There was no news at all. The Alliance was pretending to be stupid. It could not be a problem of not being able to respond. It could only be that the higher-ups of the Alliance had decided to ignore his existence, pretend that they did not see him, and do whatever they wanted. They were betting that the Crimson Swordsman, as a half-immortal, would not dare to interfere in the battle of the lower realm. If that was the case, the Crimson Swordsman might have a chance to survive. Of course, he would not choose to fight. If he was a Xianyuan swordsman, he would do so. A few separate attacks would solve the problem, but the Crimson Swordsman could not do that now. Therefore, the bandit strategy was the most effective. The people of the Eastern Heaven understood that a group of swordsmen without a home was the most terrifying. If you want to fight a swordsman, you must first build an incomparably strong turtle shell for your own home. If my home is gone, then everyone's home is gone too. If I have no cultivation backup, then everyone will have no backup. Let's see who can't hold on. He was not worried about time. The Crimson Swordsman was a realm, so there would not be a big problem in terms of unity. The opponent was an alliance, each with their own thoughts, so it was only a matter of time before a problem occurred. The Western Heaven was led by the Buddhist sect, but it was not completely under the Buddhist sect's control. He understood the thoughts of those Taoists too well. If it did not take this opportunity to cause trouble, how could they be called Taoists? The Buddhist sect often said, "Fellow Taoist, please wait." The Taoist sect often said, "Master, I am coming." Chapter 1965. Lu Xiaoyi waited outside for a day, but no demigods came looking for trouble. This was expected. Their movements were completely untraceable, so it was impossible to find their whereabouts so quickly. A day later, the Scarlet Swordsmen returned to the outer space one by one. Their losses were still within an acceptable range, but they were a bit battered and exhausted. At the very least, they had fulfilled Lu Xing's request. They were all covered in blood, and their storage rings were half full. Longtan and Zhao Jian's expressions were not too good. They knew that their performance was barely satisfactory. The swordsmen had the advantage in numbers, and they also had the advantage of surprise attacks. This should not be the case. Kill like lightning, hide the heart of a bodhisattva. This wasn't just for show. Instead, there was a profound philosophy behind it. The Scarlet Man was no stranger to this. Lu Xiaoyi did not say anything. Assemble, set out. This time, he did not need to say anything. Everyone knew what he meant. They were going to attack the next target. As for resting, running while resting was never a problem for cultivators. Great Buddha Zhao Jian said cautiously, "Xing, can you tell us the destination? Actually, we are very familiar with the environment here, including the negative space." Lu Xiaoyi glanced at him, and this was being forced to do something beyond his ability. After killing once, he had nothing left to lose. The Zen and sword systems did not argue. Everyone was from the Scarlet Swordsman system. You could not say that you were from the Zen system. They had killed very few people, so they were very restrained in robbing. Once this boat got on, it was impossible to get off. A day later, the Scarlet Swordsman group entered the negative space. As the host, the Scarlet Swordsman knew the location of the negative space around them. They were not too stupid and usually knew to collect and accumulate such strategic information. In fact, they were using it now. Since they had already reached this point, it did not matter who they robbed next. There was no need to argue. Longtan hesitated for a moment, but still opened his mouth. Xing, if Xian Yuan was the one doing it, what would the result be? Lu Xiaoyi said decisively. If Xian Yuan was the one doing it, the casualties in the target domain would be reduced by at least half. The harvest would at least be doubled. Furthermore, the number of casualties he suffered would be in the single digits, or even within a single palm strike. Not only Xian Yuan, but also the entire 5 rings. If they couldn't do that in the past 20,000 years of hunting, be it Xian Yuan or the 5 rings, they would have long been wiped out. He didn't tell them the reason and let them think about it themselves. Actually, it wasn't hard to guess. It was just a matter of mentality. You can't unleash your potential only after you've been forced into a desperate situation. Instead, you should unleash your potential at any time and place. Reality will tell you that when you erupt, there will be more people and forces that choose to cower than you think. Longtan and Zhaojian returned to the swordsman group. The group was there to sum up their experience and look for all kinds of unsatisfactory performances during the first raid. Some were in terms of willpower, and, of course, some were in terms of arrangements. Some were too disorderly, and the targets were scattered. The so-called experience would only be more fragrant if it was verified with one's own blood. One would never forget it. This time it was different. He had a target, a specific opponent, the distribution of the major sects and forces in the target domain, where resources were abundant, where treasures were good, where he might encounter stronger resistance, where insignificant and important people would stay behind to guard the domain. More than 10 days later, outside the Bitter Tree world, more than 1,000 Crimson Swordsmen were in an orderly formation, their killing intent soaring. Everyone knew what they were doing and where they stood. This allowed them to unleash greater power as a whole. This time, Lu Xiaoyi did not motivate anyone, nor did he scold anyone to provoke them. Some methods could only be used once. If they were used too many times, they would lose their effect and produce negative results. The Buddhist swordsman was growing rapidly. After all, their foundation was still there. It was just a process of adjusting their state of mind. It was still the sword light that opened the heaven and earth grand membrane. This was a small result of his research on the combination of Tao realms over the years. The Khanate 5 manifestations were especially targeted at such a fixed defense system that was built according to the momentum of the universe. Then he was still waiting. He was calculating when those half-immortals would be able to catch up. This time would not be too long. He was a half-immortal himself. Of course, he knew the ability of half-immortals. What was not certain was how much of a variable could he, the shitstick Lu, play here. Would they not come if they knew he was here? It was very possible. Then, how long could this kind of surprise attack continue? It was definitely impossible to go through all the combinations of the Alliance forces. Where was the limit? Where was the limit of the Western Heaven Buddhist sect's pressure tolerance? He did not know. In order to understand this process as soon as possible, he knew that he could no longer smash here and there like this after this battle. He did not care about himself, but he had to prevent the Crimson Swordsmen from falling into the encirclement of the Alliance. How to solve this? He could not rely on himself to get dizzy. He needed eyes. Where were the eyes? It was definitely not the Crimson Swordsmen. Their target was too big, and their size was not enough. Then, he was afraid there was only one choice, the Taoists of the Western Heaven. He could make such a big move here because he was gambling. He was gambling that those Western Heaven monsters would come looking for him, especially those from the interior heaven. He hoped that not everyone would stay in the interior heaven, right? A day later, the Crimson Swordsmen came out of the big hole in the macro membrane. Just by looking at their expressions, one could tell whether this battle had gone smoothly or not. Longtan and Zhao Jian flew over in high spirits. We returned with a full load. We killed 47 of the opponents and lost 13 of them. They were basically all bodhisattvas. It was a very good result. One had to know that this was the secondary world-breaking war. To be able to achieve this level, the weakness of the Crimson Swordsmen was one of the reasons. The change in mentality of the Crimson Swordsmen and the tight organization played a very big role. Very good. So, do you think we should continue? If we continue, which target is more suitable to choose? Can we have an unexpected effect? Lu Xiaoyi decided on the first and second targets. He did not intend to interfere anymore. It should be up to the Crimson Swordsmen to decide. In the future, they could only rely on themselves. Longton was very cautious. He did not forget himself just because of 2 successes. This was the basic quality of a great Buddha. According to our analysis, after the Fate Awakening Dharma realm was attacked, the fastest way to get the news will be through the main force of the Alliance in a month, which is now. Then they will quickly send the news to the various domains of the Alliance to strengthen their defenses. We don't know whether the Alliance will fall apart because of this, but according to the usual style of the Western Heaven Buddhist sect, they will not be willing to suffer losses like this. They will focus on how to catch us again. In theory, we still have time to sneak attack another domain. Then we will have to stop for a while and see how the other parties react. Our opinion is to choose the farthest domain of the Alliance, because it takes time for the news to be sent back. If we go through the reverse space, there's a big chance that we can catch up with the news before it is sent back. Lu Xiaoyi nodded and asked, "Have you considered the possible role of the Western Heaven demigods in there?" Chapter 1966. Longtan Zhaojian was startled. They really did not consider this because it was too far away from them. Their habitual thinking made them not consider the factor of half-immortals when considering problems. This kind of thinking originally was not wrong, but now was different from the past. Zhao Jian frowned. Enforcer, we do not know much about the abilities of half-immortals. Is there anything you want to remind us? Lu Xiaoyi said softly, they will pass the news over in a very short period of time, not a month as you think. In extreme cases, it may only take a few days. Therefore, it is not appropriate for you to use the normal time to arrange the target of the Scarlet Strike group. It should be more psychological. The 2 great Buddhas nodded silently. After a long time, Longtan opened his mouth. Then, can we carry out the second backup target? Attack the Scarlet Star and wipe out the remaining forces of the Alliance above. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Very good idea. It is a bit like the swordsman moving unhindered in the universe. At least, you have a deeper understanding of how swordsmen fight guerrilla warfare in the void of the universe. Zhao Jian let out a long breath. However, the pressure of half-immortals was still very big. Although the true strength of these monstrous half-immortals did not pose an absolute threat to them, relying on the inner and outer scenic sky would still increase countless variables. Enforcer, you mean that there are already half-immortals on the Alliance's side? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. This may be my fault. If I did not appear, they would not have appeared. Longa nodded. I understand. But Enforcer, your appearance is not on the same level as theirs. Our Scarlet Strike group has taken a big advantage. You see, before he finished speaking, he had already looked to the side. Enforcer, they are here. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Get ready, we will leave in a while. They are indeed here, but this may be a friend. Lu Xiaoyi's figure leaped and disappeared without a trace. When he reappeared, a familiar figure was faintly discernible in the background of the universe. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I knew it was you. In the Western Heaven, there's probably no one else who has such great ability to find us so quickly. Duanli laughed out loud. It's not that I'm capable, but that the Taoists have a wide reach. Furthermore, it's the enforcers who do good deeds. Several large Taoist realms in the Western Heaven were still discussing whether they should organize a joint operation to teach the Buddhists of the Western Heaven a lesson. All these years, the actions of the Western Paradise Buddhists have been getting more and more unbridled. We have long wanted to make a move against them, to be able to wait for the arrival of the greatest destroyer of the Taoist sect of the universe. Is this the will of the heavens? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. You think too highly of me. I'm just abusing an exterior-level swordsman's trust. I didn't come to the Western Paradise to cause trouble. I may cause trouble, but I won't do things that won't benefit me. Duanli laughed heartily. After the two of them parted, there was naturally a scene. It was true that the Taoists of the Western Heaven wanted to make a move, but it was only in the mood. To put into action, there was still too much preparation to do. How could it be completed in a few months or years? The Eastern Heaven Buddhists had at least hundreds of thousands of years to prepare for the First Cosmic War, and that was because the Eastern Heaven Buddhists were relatively concentrated. In the Western Heaven, several large Taoist realms were relatively scattered. It was extremely inconvenient to travel a distance of thousands of years, so it was impossible to arrange it all. Duan Li's visit was actually more of a representation of himself. In the interior heaven, there were also monsters of the Western Heaven Buddhists. For example, Hands-Free was a hidden ascetic monk. When the interior heaven chose the head of the enforcers, he was chosen as the second enforcer. At that time, most people thought that it was because Marching Monk and Lu Xiaoyi were both in the Eastern Heaven. In order not to monopolize the Eastern Heaven, he wasn't chosen. But in the eyes of people like Lu Xiaoyi and Duan Li, it wasn't necessarily so. This monk was very skilled, and he didn't completely wear the same pants as Marching Monk. He was a person with a story. It's fine. If it was on speakerphone, I'd probably come alone. Come to an agreement. Everyone would try to turn big problems into small ones, and small ones into nothing. He wouldn't use force. After all, he wasn't a military monk. It was true that the steam bun seller and the steam bun seller were enemies, but that was only if they were on the same street. If they were not in the same city, they would not be able to reach each other, right? He wouldn't fall out with me because of this, and I wouldn't either, but I reckon that the possibility of him falling out with you is higher. This time, it was Duan Li's turn to smile bitterly. This was because Lu Xiaoyi could tell at a glance that there was another reason for his visit. Other than wanting to lend a hand, Duan Li had dared to come here because he wanted to kill the monk. But the problem was that his ability might not reach his expectations. Cultivators were like this. A battle of magical powers was a battle of magical powers, and victory and defeat were victory and defeat. However, a battle of life and death was another matter altogether. In a battle of magical powers, you could rely on a slightly superior move to gain a slight advantage, but this advantage could not determine life and death. Therefore, in most battle scenarios, victory and defeat were easy to determine, but life and death were difficult to grasp. Swordsman was strong in this aspect. They were often clumsy in terms of victory and defeat. Watching the battle scene, it was as if they were being beaten up. However, they were the last to survive. This ability was what many orthodoxies feared about the sword vein. Duan Li and Hands-Free were both in the Western Paradise. Needless to say, their relationship was obvious. Their strength could determine victory and defeat, but it was difficult to determine life and death. This was something that Duan Li did not wish to see. Therefore, he came here to borrow Lu Xiaoyi's ability to determine life and death. Lu Xiaoyi rejected him directly. It was easy for him to determine life and death, but what would he do after that? Would he just leave the Crimson Sword Vein to fend for itself? Therefore, he directly told Duan Li that if Hands-Free came to provoke him, he would help Duan Li kill him. However, if Hands-Free only wanted to be a peacemaker, Lu Xiaoyi would choose to accept. Duan Li's vision was focused on the conflict between Western Paradise's Taoists and Buddhists, while his was focused on the survival of the Crimson Sword Vein. Their starting points were different, so naturally, their judgments were different. Duan Li nodded, expressing his understanding. I understand. In this cultivation world, there are various circles of power entangling endlessly. Everyone has their own choices. We are friends, but it doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything. If hands-free dares to provoke the enforcer, I will do my best to help the enforcer and kill this monk. If this bald donkey is tactful and knows to come over to mediate, then he will have dodged a bullet. If the enforcer is in trouble, I will still do my best. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Good, that's a friend. There's still a long time, so why the rush? Speaking of which, the Western Paradise is your territory. I'm blind here, but I do have a lot to ask of you. Duan Li was also very straightforward. Enforcer, just say it. The main reason I'm here is to see if I can help you. As for hands-free, it's like gathering grass to beat a rabbit. It's best if you can catch him, but it doesn't matter if you can't. Chapter 1967. The Western Heavens Buddhist army approached Planet Comet. As they were afraid of being detected, their encirclement was very restrained. As the army gathered and began to squeeze towards the center, the Buddhist higher-ups began to feel that something was wrong. It was too quiet. It was so quiet that it was abnormal. It was just like an empty planet. A great Buddha asked, could it be that they escaped from inside Planet Comet? The 5 dynasties shook their heads. How could they make such a simple mistake? Send some people in and see if there are any traces left behind. A cultivator's divine sense was like a radar. With thousands of people surrounding them, no one could completely hide their presence. If they still could not sense it by now, then there was no one left. Not long after, news came that Planet Comet was empty. The Scarlet Swordsman group had gone to the starry sky, and there was no trace of them. The Alliance's higher-ups fell into a dead silence. They were not sure if this was a normal troop movement by the Scarlet Swordsman, or if they had sensed the Alliance's movements and thus left early. In theory, there were many people in the Alliance, so it was indeed difficult to completely cover their tracks. But there were too many unknowns and too many variables in this. Everyone began to investigate internally to see if there were any recent movements, such as those who had deliberately left and other such possibilities, but the 5 dynasties did not think much of it. Although this operation was huge, they did not inform the Alliance of their destination before they flew to Planet Comet. In the early stages, they had already sent trusted scouts to remotely control them, afraid that the Scarlet Swordsman group would run away. It was common knowledge that an army was most afraid of missing their target. They had already done their best to maintain secrecy and remote control in the early stages, and they had made such a decision very quickly. They had basically made the decision immediately after receiving Lutong. Even with such speed, they still missed their target. The worst thing has happened. I think we don't need to catch the mole in our own ranks and cause everyone to be anxious and feel threatened. Actually, the biggest possibility is that the Scarlet Swordsman group has started to change their strategy after that person arrived. They're going to go wild. I've heard from my fellow Buddhists in the Eastern Sky that those sword cultivators are best at wandering around in the void of the universe. They go to the east and then to the west. They don't have a fixed target, and they don't have a fixed route. If that's the case, it will be difficult to find them. A Buddha asked, wasn't the Scarlet Swordsman like this before? It's all guerrilla warfare. What's the difference? The 5 dynasties explained, it's completely different. Scarlet's guerrilla warfare is passive. Their goal is to protect the Scarlet Planet and entangle with our army. Their vision is not broad enough, and they are not brave enough. They lack the determination to die together with us. The Eastern Sky Swordsman is different. I reckon that they must have raided someone's lair. There are 16 realms in the Alliance, and all of them are possible. Only then did everyone understand. Carefully thinking about it, this was most in line with the Eastern Sky Swordsman's way of doing things. If it was another person, it would be impossible for them to immediately obtain the authority to control the Scarlet Buddha sword vein. But this little swordsman Lu was different. One of the Buddhas started to panic. What should we do? If the Scarlet people really go to our respective realms to cause trouble, almost none of our forces will be able to stop them. Returning to their respective domains was definitely the worst solution. The breakup of the alliance was exactly what they wanted. But if we just wait like this, how can we determine their next target in 16 domains? Some Buddhas were very attentive. Great Master, since this person's intention is to bring the Scarlet People around to plunder our domains, why didn't he act quietly? Directly come into contact with the Scarlet People and wander around in a large area? Why did he have to report his name? Isn't that unnecessary? The Five Dynasties was very bitter. Even if his wisdom was unparalleled, encountering such an evildoer gave him a headache. He had to answer this question, and he had to answer truthfully. Otherwise, it would cause more and more suspicions in the alliance. He reported his name first, waiting for us to take the initiative to negotiate. If we didn't talk, he would bring people to make a move. Everyone, think carefully. Under the circumstances at that time, could we have taken the initiative to negotiate? As long as we negotiated, we would have immediately eased the Scarlet People's predicament. If this continued without end, the alliance would have come in vain in the end. He admitted the reason himself, and, on the contrary, received everyone's approval. Yes, under the circumstances at that time, thousands of alliance cultivators had gathered. If you came, I would have to negotiate with you. Then there would be no need to fight this war. Even if we still had to negotiate in the end, we would have to fight a battle to determine victory and defeat. Only then would we have a better position at the negotiation table. Both sides had the same mentality. The only difference was that the alliance wanted to fight a war, while the Scarlet People were wandering outside. Their purpose was actually the same. Through war, they would force the other party to open negotiations. Naturally, they would have the initiative to negotiate terms. We can still hold on, but I don't know how long we can hold on. Our own domain is under attack, but the main force is doing nothing outside. The core question is, where will they target? Can anyone guess? Soon, someone pulled out a star map. Everyone looked at it for a long time, each with their own opinions, but they could not form a unified opinion. Only 1 out of 16. Even if they took into account the distance, it was impossible to make an accurate judgment. Everyone looked at the 5 dynasties. The old Buddha felt the great responsibility on his shoulders. Find a base point, but we know nothing about their attacking habits. Is the target of attack decided by the Scarlet People, or is it decided by Lu Tong? I think it's the latter. Then, what are his attacking habits? We have only heard of his reputation and deeds, but we don't know anything about his specific actions. So there's no point in making a choice now. So we can only wait for the news of our domain being attacked. Only after at least 1 or 2 attacks can we make a judgment about their attacking habits. That's the most reliable judgment. Some Buddhas were very dissatisfied. Do you mean that we don't have to do anything now? Just wait for the disaster to come? Whoever is unlucky deserves it. The lucky domain starts to worry about their fate in the next round. Anyway, the Great Holy Heavens is definitely not in the list of attack. The 5 dynasties suppressed the anger in his heart. He knew that he could not be angry now. Once he was angry, the alliance would immediately collapse. There would be no turning back. He looked at everyone and said in a low voice, "A strong force must be a force that can withstand the test of time. It's not just good times, it's also bad times. Death is everywhere, and losses are everywhere. We can't control these. But what we can control is that when death and losses come, we can still maintain a strong will. This is true strength. In any war, there are countless mistakes in the process. But it doesn't matter. When the final battle comes, who can say for sure who will win? Persevere, and we still have a chance. Give up complaining, and we've already lost. I'll say 2 points. The losses of the domain being attacked will be borne by the entire alliance. The Great Holy Heavens will take half of it. In addition, our half-immortal friends have already started to move. They will provide us with the most real-time information, all for the final attack. Chapter 1968. The Alliance's army remained motionless, waiting for news here. The only thing that comforted the 5 dynasties was that no domain had left. This was the most basic perseverance, But no one knew how long this perseverance would last. Time passed slowly, and everyone was waiting anxiously. Time, which usually passed in the blink of an eye, seemed to be moving very slowly now. They were all waiting for the first boot to land, but no matter how they waited, it did not come. According to their estimation, it would not take more than 10 days to travel from the star of comet to the nearest domain through the reverse space. Of course, the first ambush had to be based on the time and distance. This was because the purpose of the ambush was to show the alliance. Of course, there was no need to be secretive about it. The best method was the simplest one. The first one to attack should be the closest one. This was a normal judgment, but no matter what it was, as long as it touched the sword lunatic, it would definitely become abnormal. 1 month, no news. 2 months, still no news. 3 months, still no news. A Buddha who was burning with impatience couldn't hold it in any longer. Is our judgment right? Does the Crimson Sword Vein really have the courage to plunder Buddhist domains everywhere? Can it just admit defeat, run away, or just hide in another base that we have not yet grasped? The 5 dynasties remained motionless like mountains. No, if it was just the Crimson Sword Vein, what you said might have happened. But if there was a Xin Yuan swordsman leading, then they would definitely not be cowards, let alone run away. This is their philosophy, and it has not changed for tens of thousands of years. Now that they have come to the eastern sky, it has changed? Impossible. He still persisted, but the others might not be able to do the same. Another 10 days passed like this. Suddenly, a warning came from the sky. The 5 dynasties were captured in their hands, and with a sweep of their divine sense, they were immediately open to everyone. There was a Buddha with a sorrowful expression. Fate awakening Dharma world? How could it be the fate awakening Dharma world? It doesn't make sense. Although we're not the furthest from the star of comet, we are definitely not the closest. No matter which aspect we choose, this does not make sense. Is it a personal grudge? This was the Buddha of the fate awakening Dharma world. His domain had won the lottery, but he really could not understand the reason behind it. Why was it them? A Buddha from another realm was more rational and quickly realized that something was amiss. Something's wrong with the timing. Considering the distance between Huaxing and Yuanjue, even if they set off in advance, it would take at most a month and a half for the news to spread. Now, 100 days had passed. This was a surprise attack, not an outing. How could they be so slow? Was he deliberately mystifying things? Or was there a dispute midway? Another Buddha joked, if we're talking about time, running all the way from the origin world is just right. No one thought that his explanation was reliable. This was war, not travel. At their current level, which domain did not have the ability to easily open a direct and reverse space passage and fly in the reverse space. They were very familiar with the star chart, including the negative space and, of course, the crimson boundary. It did not make sense for them to run for 100 days when they had the ability to solve the surprise attack in a month. Was his brain rusty? Or more than 1,000 people rusted together? Of course, they didn't know that there was indeed a certain pretentious criminal who had gone crazy. The most unreliable joke was actually the truth. Such a method of surprise attack made people completely unpredictable and unable to find the pattern of target selection. Seeing everyone's eyes looking over, the 5 dynasties sneered. Well, if we want to draw a psychological sketch of this person, then we have already made the first stroke. This person is used to not taking the ordinary path and belongs to the kind of character who takes the unconventional path. The more normal the consideration, the more he disdains to use it. Everyone, just this first attack has already brought us a lot of information. Now, the range of choices he has been greatly reduced, right? Hearing this, everyone felt that it was indeed very reasonable. So, following this train of thought, they began to guess his next move. After 1 or 2 more attacks, the general situation would be revealed. Some of the more quick-witted ones said, if this is the premise, then Crimson's next choice will definitely not be the one closest to Yuanjue's Dharma realm. Of course, It is also impossible for him to deliberately choose the one furthest away. Given that his purpose has been exposed, the time and distance will still be an important basis for him to consider. So, excluding the closest and those that are too far away, we have about 7 targets, of which 5 are the most likely. We can split up once. 2 out of 5, master. Do you want to rush over? Now, time is life. The 5 dynasties were unmoved. Calm down. The probability of 2 out of 5 is still not enough. We need to be confident. We need to see more clearly. Otherwise, if we make a mistake once or twice, our morale will be completely gone. Everyone was silent. The 5 dynasties were right. It was impossible to draw a complete picture of a person with just one stroke. They still needed more information about his personality and habits. So where the second target was chosen was very important. The Alliance's strength could be split up once, and they could still crush Crimson Swordvein, but any more and it would be very dangerous. So in reality, they could pounce on 2 targets at the same time. They continued to wait, but in the waiting crowd, the monks of Yunjue's Dharma realm were somewhat restless. Their homes had been plundered, the losses were unknown, and the casualties were unknown. Even these bodhisattvas and Buddhas who had attained the Tao could not maintain their usual mentality. The Alliance had agreed to share the loss of resources equally, but this was in terms of materials. What about the loss of manpower? How would they share it? This time, the answer came abnormally fast. About 10 days later, the next warning came. The Bitter Tree world had been attacked, and the losses were heavy. The monks threw themselves at the star map, looking left and right, front and back, but they could not understand. A Buddhist said bluntly, This order is completely reversed, right? The first surprise attack gave up on the near and went for the far, but the second time, they chose the closest target. Shouldn't it be the other way around? There were also those who were dissatisfied. Why are you drawing a picture of a madman? Facing everyone's gaze, the 5 dynasties found that they had been led astray. Originally, they were trying to determine the whereabouts of the Crimson Man, but now it became how to prove that their vision was not blurred by old age. The second portrait of this person, he always surprises us. This is a characteristic that cannot be grasped. But in view of this person's unpredictable actions, we can at least use the method of elimination. The 5 dynasties found that they could not keep up with this swordsman's thinking. The rules and regulations formed by thousands of years of cultivation always made them consciously and unconsciously rush left and right. And when the other party's goal was revealed, only then did they realize, oh, so that's it. But after that, they were still confused. This was the problem of the fixed thinking. It was not something that could be changed immediately if you wanted to. His wisdom could be maximized within this framework. But once he jumped out of this framework, he seemed to be somewhat powerless. He was like this, but in fact, it was the same for others because they were all cultivators who lived in the same framework. So in the end, he could only use the method of elimination, the stupidest method. At the same time, he sent an invitation to his half-immortal friends. If you want to deal with people whose thinking did not fall within the framework, you can only rely on those who are also outside the framework. Chapter 1969. The various Buddhas of the Alliance spoke enthusiastically, with the rhythm of one near and one far away. Then the next time, it's very likely that he will look for it in the furthest realms. Since this person doesn't take the usual path and is always unexpected, why can't he go near and far? I thought that he would still go to the closest realm to Ancient Tree World because no one thought of it. What do you mean no one thought of it? Haven't you already thought of it? So according to the master's portrait, your thoughts are not reliable. Has everyone's thinking become rigid? Why do they have to start from a distance? There's still many ways to start, right? For example, the order of joining the Alliance is actually the degree of enthusiasm of Crimson. Yuanju and Ancient Tree are the first batch to join the Alliance. Does that mean that Crimson will only attack the backbone of the Alliance for the time being? Those who are the most hostile? If that's the case, there are still 3 families in the first batch to join the alliance. Isn't the scope of consideration much smaller? Some argued. Senior brother, you're wrong. The biggest characteristic of a master's portrait is that there is no order and no pattern. When you find the pattern, he will change. For example, you said that he chose from the first batch of realms to join the alliance. Then why can't he change it to the second or third batch? The reason is very simple. The last ones to join are often the least interested in this operation. Then if we attack them, it will stimulate their impulse to return to the realms. So I think that we will attack whoever joins last among the 16 families of the alliance. Someone suggested a new idea. Can we use crimson as the center and draw 2 semicircles? Maybe we can see his next move. Someone said disdainfully, good idea. Then junior brother, tell me, where do we cut the semicircles? In theory, there are countless positions. In the midst of the argument, a figure appeared among the group of great Buddhas of the alliance. Everyone politely greeted him. The young monk returned the greeting, very polite, as if he was a junior. 5 dynasties let out a long breath. Junior brother, hands free. You're finally here. We're discussing the next location of Crimson's sword vein. Monk, hands free, smiled slightly. Did you find anything? 5 dynasties lowered his voice. A chicken's mouth is a crow's mouth, is a chicken's mouth, is a chicken's mouth, is a crow's mouth. I said that we can use the elimination method. And guess what? They included the remaining 14 realms. Each of them had their own reasons and pretended to be serious. It really makes one speechless. Shanti could not help but laugh. Senior brothers are all joking. He also wanted to laugh. The great Buddhas of the 5 dynasties came from the great sage heavens, which was one of the strongest Buddhist realms in the western heavens. Its size was comparable to Zhou Xian in the eastern heavens. As for him, he was born in another powerful realm in the western heavens, the small Sumeru realm. Although its name was small, it wasn't small at all. If the great sage heavens could be seen as the Zhou Xian of the western heavens, then the small Sumeru realm could be seen as the 5 rings of the western heavens. Their individual strength was especially strong. The attack on the Scarlet Star this time was actually led by the great sage heavens. It had nothing to do with the small Sumeru realm. However, as the 2 great sage heavens and great sage heavens, the 2 great sage heavens and great sage heavens still maintained a good relationship with each other. When the 5 great sage heavens were in trouble, the small Sumeru realm's loudspeaker had rushed over at their request. Loudspeaker had rushed over out of camaraderie, but also out of selfishness. If it were another demi-immortal, regardless of whether they were in the interior or exterior realm, he would not have bothered to make a move. Whoever shat on them would have to clean up after them. Why should he take the lead and clean up after them? There were no benefits, but now that they were in trouble, they thought of him in the small Sumeru realm. The key was the name of the shit stirrer, so he had no choice but to pay attention to it. He had actually severely offended such a person when he was in the exterior realm. Although no one had mentioned this karma, the more it was like this, the more it would have to be resolved sooner or later. For cultivators of their level, this was something that could not be avoided. He had to solve this problem. There were 2 ways. If little punk Lou made a mistake, he would erase him. If he didn't, he would help him. No matter what he did, it was a way to resolve the karma. It depended on the situation. This was the principle of demi-immortals. The big goal was fixed, and the small goal was determined by the changes in the environment. They would not lock themselves in a fixed pattern. Not only would it be too tiring to live, but it would also be too tiring to cultivate. Friend or foe? It might be a very accidental choice. Just like when Hands-Free came here, he wanted to try how to eliminate this big karma. If he succeeded, it would greatly improve his reputation in the Eastern and Western Buddhist sects. He might become the benchmark of Buddhism in the future. If he couldn't, then he would choose to resolve the karma, make some compensation, and express goodwill. Even if they couldn't become friends, they wouldn't be enemies either. In the future, there might be a possibility of cooperation. If this was the case, it was also a kind of success, a very practical success. This was cultivation. There were many paths, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. The only thing you needed to remind yourself was not to fix yourself to a dead end. The Five Dynasties Alliance's Buddhas told him all the nonsense, suggestions, and strange things. So, junior brother Hands-Free, what do you think? If it were you, what do you think they would choose? Hands-Free smiled. I have worked with Inspector Liu for several years in the exterior realm. In my opinion, forgive me for being blunt, but even if you divided into 10 teams, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to catch him. That's because you actually missed out on a very important place. The Scarlet Star? All the Buddhas were greatly shocked because this was indeed a direction they hadn't considered. Why not? There were a large number of people left behind by the Alliance on the Scarlet Star. Eliminating them could not only vent their anger, but also give hope to the people of their home planet and maintain the existence of the Sword Vein. Most importantly, it would be safe. No one would think that they would kill their way back to their home planet. This was the result of thinking rigidly. Everyone was still in that frame and hadn't completely jumped out. But with Hands-Free's reminder, all the Buddhas immediately felt that this was very likely to be the next target of the Scarlet Buddha Sword Vein surprise attack. Hands-Free wasn't as sure as them. To him, this was the most inconceivable direction that he could think of with his wisdom. The significance of this to him was that if the Scarlet Sword Vein really came, it meant that the general trend was with him. He would contact some half-immortals and bet on this round to strangle this freak in the Western Paradise. This was a response to the heavens. If the Scarlet Sword Vein didn't come and went to a place they didn't expect at all, it meant that the general trend wasn't with Buddhism. At least at this time and place, it wasn't with Buddhism in this incident. He wouldn't endlessly try and intercept it. That wasn't the way of half-immortals. He would directly meet the swordsmen and mediate between them to appease this matter. This was also a response to the heavens. Hands-Free's general trend wasn't there, and the members of the Alliance probably wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. If they guessed wrong again, there was only one path left, which was to go home and fix fences and walls. They had to take care of their own nest first. Chapter 1970. Lu Xiaoyi returned to the Crimson Swordsman group. The swordsmen were all looking at him. Although they wanted to know which half-immortal it was, no one asked. That would be impolite. But there was one thing. They were more at peace, because they saw the backing of the strong queen. No half-immortal would pay attention to the Crimson Swordsman, but Lu Xing was different. When he came, the focus of the matter seemed to have changed. It was no longer about the Crimson Swordsman. It was a very inexplicable feeling. A Taoist half-immortal. Lu Xiaoyi played it down. So, you don't have to worry about the half-immortal's position in this matter. What you need to worry about is how you can continue to kill without being intercepted. I said that I won't interfere in the battle of the cultivators in the main world. This is your own responsibility. No one can help you. I can't. Even Old Yin can't help you. The Crimson Swordsman nodded silently. They knew very well that in the Western Heaven, no one could compete with Buddhism in terms of the number of half-immortals. So, if someone like Lu Xing really intervened, it might not be a good thing for their future. Dragon Pool said softly, "Xing, time is tight. So let's start now. We still need 2 months to return to the Crimson Star." Lu Xiaoyi didn't move. He originally wanted to give up the right to choose the next target, but Duan Li's arrival made him feel danger. The hands-free monk was here and was very familiar with him. After being with him for several years, this person's thoughts were very deep. If it was just him, it didn't matter where he went. But now, the battle between them had begun to shift to the sword vein. If he was caught, he, Lu Xiaoyi, would lose this contest and be kicked out. If he couldn't catch him, Buddhism would have to come over and ask for peace with the sword vein. There was no need to communicate. This was a feeling in the dark. Besides the Crimson Star, do you have any other backup plans? Everyone was very surprised. Did Xing change his mind? It was normal. His half-immortal friend must have brought him some news that made the Crimson journey impossible. The world of persuasion, the world of 3 virtues, the world of solitary radiance. That's about it. We don't know which one is the safest, because we don't know the whereabouts of the other party. The monks of the Alliance are not to be trifled with, especially the leaders of the 5 dynasties. They are scheming and astute. Lu Xiaoyi looked up at the starry sky and sighed. I'm a perfectionist. No matter what he did, he hoped to do it perfectly and leave no regrets. If I recall correctly, your storage rings weren't even filled to the brim when you first snatched the Fate Awakening realm, right? Longtan Zhaojian understood tacitly. Official Xing is right. If there's nothing wrong, then there's more to be done. If there's something wrong, then there's something wrong. Since it's not full, let's go back and fill it up again. This time, the heaven and earth membrane will be broken by us. I don't think it will be too difficult. The Crimson Swordsman entered the negative space and disappeared. To Lu Xiaoyi, there were only 16 realms. Including the Crimson Star, there were a total of 18 choices. In theory, the probability of the other party guessing correctly was not high, but he would never gamble on luck unless it was absolutely necessary. Moreover, the Western Heaven Buddhist sect still had the strength to divide their troops at least once. He only cared about absolutes, especially when there were so many people following him. His personal strength was enough for him to deal with danger, but these people could not. Once they encountered the main forces of the Alliance, the Bodhisattva realm would not be able to escape, and more than half of the Buddhas would be lost. After a battle, they would no longer have the capital to hunt and rob. He had to ensure that they were absolutely safe, because as long as they persevered for 1 or 2 rounds, the Alliance would definitely be the one to perish. There would definitely be people who would want to go home regardless of the consequences. He would also achieve his goal of dividing the Alliance, and the following negotiations would be a matter of course. In an environment like the Western Heaven, negotiation was the only way to solve the problem. What was the hands-free monk thinking now? Or would he wait for him at the Crimson Star? If I want to be shameless, I can snatch the Fate Awakening 3 times. Outside the Crimson Star, in a hidden place, the Alliance's army was waiting. There was a sense of uneasiness in the atmosphere. It was anxiety, worry, nervousness, and blindness towards the future. Such an atmosphere had appeared since the beginning when the Crimson Man changed his profession to become a space bandit. It was getting thicker and thicker, so thick that it could not be resolved. It was not something that could be resolved by everyone sharing the losses. In order to show that victory was in their hands, the 5 dynasties played a game of chess with a hands-free monk. They played a game of chess every few days, steadily and surely, showing their determination and patience that were different from ordinary people. The Buddhas gathered together and watched the 2 of them play chess. They felt that the cultivators from the Buddhism world were truly different from the rest. Not everyone was able to calm their minds during every major event. Day after day, the disputes among the bodhisattvas gradually increased. There were thousands of people, and the atmosphere was too oppressive. The disciples of Buddhism also had tempers, especially the monks from the Fate Awakening Dharma realm and the Bitter Tree realm. Their tempers were especially bad, but they could not be blamed. Their homes had been destroyed, so who would have the patience to wait here and watch people play chess? Of course, the 2 of them had calmness, and it had nothing to do with their realm. Who would be different? In such a wait, everyone became more and more confident, because if they set off from the Bitter Tree realm, the nearest realm would be within half a month through the negative space. The news had not come, which meant that the target of the Crimson Man's attack this time was not near, but far away, including the Crimson Star. The Crimson Star was about 2 months away from the Bitter Tree realm. Now that more than a month had passed, the probability of the enemy choosing the Crimson Man was getting higher and higher. The 5 dynasties placed a piece with a relaxed expression. The hands-free monk laughed. Senior brother, you seem to be very happy. Do you feel that you have full confidence? The 5 dynasties asked in return. Junior brother, why do I feel that you have the least confidence in your own suggestion? Do you not believe in yourself? Or did you overestimate the swordsman? The hands-free monk shook his head and gently placed a piece down. Senior brother is wrong. I have been underestimating Inspector Liu all this time. Every time I want to correct my view, I find that my correction value is always some distance away from reality. Cultivators can't boost the morale of others and reduce their own prestige. But some people can't be judged by common sense. The marching monks are like that, and now they have made it difficult for themselves to return to the interior realm. It's very embarrassing. The five dynasties asked, now that half a month has passed, and, judging from the distance, the probability of the Crimson Man coming is getting higher and higher, isn't it? The hands-free monk sighed. Senior brother, there are many ways to travel. You can't just use time to measure it. Some people take big strides, while others deliberately dawdle. This Crimson Swordsman group took 100 days to travel from the Star of Explosion to the Fate Awakening realm. How do they travel? Do they crawl? Senior brother, have you forgotten the lesson of the past so quickly? Chapter 1971. The Five Dynasties were shocked. He had really forgotten about this matter, but he was still stubborn. That was the beginning of the first realm. No one knows, so of course they can do as they please. But after the first attack, time is of the utmost importance to both sides. They won't be in the mood to wander anymore. I'm sure. Hands-free smiled. It's good that you're sure. Actually, I also support you. They continue to play chess, but the five dynasties' hearts were in chaos. When another half a month passed, a warning came. The old Buddha's face was ashen, but no one opened it, because according to the schedule, the Scarlet Swordsman should have appeared here, but they didn't. He knew that he had guessed wrong again. He stared at hands-free in front of him. I can't choose 2 out of 15, because the opponent is a lunatic. But what if I choose 4 or 6 out of 15? His meaning was clear. If the Alliance army was divided into 4 or 6, even if they didn't have much of an advantage against the Scarlet Swordsman, they could only delay the opponent. This was already a life and death situation. 16 realms to kill one, but they were still forced to this extent. It really made people speechless. Hands-free sighed. Senior brother, forgive me for being blunt. Even if I gave you 6 choices, you still wouldn't be able to choose. The five dynasties' monk robes moved without wind. Obviously, the depression in his heart had been suppressed to the extreme. Junior brother hands-free, I won't blame you. I know that you still have a backup plan. If you can't encircle them this time, you'll use the name of the small Sumeru realm to mediate. It's all your name in the small Sumeru realm. Fine, I won't fight with you. But the great sage heavens worked so hard to form an alliance here. We can't just end like this, right? Do you dare to bet with me? I bet that if I divide the army into 6, I'll definitely be able to stop the Scarlet Swordsman. If I still can't guess correctly, you can take my position, and the great sage heavens will have nothing to do with this alliance. You can negotiate with me as you wish. But if I'm right, I'll fight again. I'll divide the army into 4 and bet on the fate of the Western Heaven Buddhism. You can't stop me. Hands-free was calm. Senior brother, you're thinking too much. If you go against the swordsman, you're afraid that you'll lose your mind. Disaster will come. Even the exterior immortal monarch lost his position because of him, let alone you, the so-called leader of the alliance of the main world Western Heaven. Fine, I'll do as senior brother wishes. Let's not guess 6. To show the small Sumeru world's friendship with the great sage heavens, you can choose 8. As long as 1 out of the 8 is the one mentioned in the warning letter, I will give up my original plan and go crazy with you. But if you still can't guess it correctly, then don't persist any longer. This is the final stage of the epic changing. Isn't it good to pass the burden to the younger generation? Hands-free's words not only shamed the five dynasties, but even the great Buddhas at the side felt uncomfortable when they heard it. Once upon a time, the sun god great Buddha of the origin world had become a has-been old man who was looked down upon by others. The five dynasties struck out with their palms. Good. If my guess is wrong, then I will abdicate and wholeheartedly support junior apprentice brothers' negotiations. Now that the 2 of them had made the oath, the group of great Buddhas started to quarrel with each other. Among them, a portion of them still hoped to continue the encirclement, but most of them had already decided to retreat. Their home was more important than anything else. But the problem now wasn't here. It was the bet this time. There were 16 realms, excluding the 2 that they had already snatched, and the Scarlet Star was no longer a possibility. That meant that they had to choose 8 out of 14. If they still couldn't make the right choice, then they couldn't help but wonder if their intelligence was enough to survive in the unpredictable universe. The 5 dynasties closed their eyes in concentration, while the surrounding Buddha sect members were deliberating in silence. Everyone had a list of the 8 realms in their hearts. They wrote down their names and showed it to them, not to bet or give them hints, but purely to test their own eyesight and judgment. Some of the more arrogant ones only wrote down 6 names, or even 3 or 2. Some of the more arrogant ones only wrote down 1 name, as if they were the only ones who were clear of the chaos in the universe. But the 5 dynasties didn't follow their lead. He only relied on his own intuition, abandoning all conjectures, analysis, and deduction. He wrote down his 8 choices purely based on his intuition. Then, everyone's eyes were fixed on hands-free, meaning that he would be the one to open the warning letter. Manti sighed softly. Hundreds of great Buddhas of the sun god were confused by a sh*T stick, which was also a wonder in the cultivation world of the universe. With so many people, even if some of them guessed correctly, what was the use? Who should they listen to and not listen to? So he said, I won't guess anymore. I feel that I can't guess it either. Then everyone please take a look. With a wave of his hand, the warning letter opened in the air. The words on it made all the great Buddhas present feel ashamed. Fate Awakening Dharma Realm. 200 great Buddhas guessed nearly 1,000 names, but none of them got it right. I'm going to find someone to negotiate. Is there anyone who wants to come with me? If not, then go back to your own homes. At least we can resist one wave. It's a bit embarrassing to be robbed before the negotiation is successful. This was purely a crushing of intelligence, crushing the dignity of every great Buddha to pieces. Their battle intent was long gone. The monks from Fate Awakening and Bitter Tree World did not even say goodbye and just left. They cannot be blamed for being rude. After all, their homes were robbed. Who knew what happened to them? Especially Fate Awakening Dharma Realm. It was really fated. In such a short period of time, it was robbed twice. Who could they find a reason with? Once something like this started, there was no way to stop it. The Scarlet Swordsman's whereabouts were so strange. Who dared to say that their home planet would not be their next destination? As for the negotiation, they would leave it to the Great Sage Heavens and Little Sioux Air World. Anyway, they had already left. Who would care about these things? A failed alliance would have a far-reaching impact. At least, there would not be another alliance like this for thousands of years. This included the Scarlet Planet now. The cultivators of the alliance had all left. If you were still here when the negotiation was over, you would be courting death. No one would be able to save you. Only the 5 dynasties did not leave. I'll go with you. I want to see what kind of monster this is. Mieni did not want to reject. Senior brother, are you still thinking of sketching this swordsman's character? The 5 dynasties shook his head. I understand now. You have no way of sketching a person with intermittent mental illness. I think he doesn't even know what he is doing. I just want to see this person. I want to see this person who is so depressed that he can only fall apart without even meeting him. Mieni gave a kind warning. Senior brother, I have to remind you, don't be fooled by this person's cunning. Don't think that he is someone who likes to use his brain more than his hands. The fact was that the strength under his control was even more terrifying than his schemes and plots. If you want to make a move, please forgive me for not being able to help you. Senior brother, you have to know that the reason why I insisted on negotiating is because the Taoists have already started to make their move, not only in the realm level, but also in the realm of half-immortals. The bet was just a joke. I wouldn't bet such an important thing on the fate of the underworld. It is because your alliance is progressing too slowly. You have already missed the best time. It is time to stop. Chapter 1972. Lu Xiaoyi stood in the void and waited quietly. Not far away, Duanli didn't hide his presence at all. It had been 2 months since the last robbery in the Dharma realm. The Buddhist half-immortals of the Western Heaven should have found their way here. Duanli wasn't here to help Lu Xiaoyi as a friend. In the Western Heaven, any agreement couldn't be separated from the participation of the two giants, Buddhism and Taoism. Otherwise, the effect would be limited, incomplete, and not binding enough. In the distance, there was an aura fluctuation rapidly approaching. Then, four figures appeared in their line of sight. There were 3 half-immortals and 1 sun spirit. Lu Xiaoyi was unfamiliar with the other 2 half-immortals. Obviously, they were evildoers from the exterior. Lu Xiaoyi stepped out of the crowd and went up to greet him. As 2 people who had worked together in the exterior realm for several years and were both the chief and second enforcers, they still had a normal friendship. However, some things were hidden in the heart and would not be shown on the face. Hands-free, said Amitabha. The exterior genius was about to part ways. I didn't expect us to meet again so soon. It seems that I'm really fated to meet you. You're a mysterious dragon. Since you've come to the Western Heaven this time, let me do my best as a host. Lu Xiaoyi said with a smile. I'm ashamed. I've just come to the Western Heaven, and I'm already treated as an unwelcome guest. I don't expect to be treated well. I'm already thankful that I'm not kicked out. The 2 of them talked and laughed as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for many years. They were exceptionally close. After discussing the follow-up of the exterior's Heaven's Heartplate and the departure and stay of the interior's masters, they quickly entered the main topic on hands-free. This was because he knew Inspector Lu very well. He liked to do things in a straightforward manner. It was not good to be secretive. About the Crimson Sword vein, what do you think? Lu Xiaoyi didn't hide anything. To be honest, I'm here on a personal matter on the exterior heaven's 5th decay, Senior's request. I'm just passing by. Since I've encountered you, I had no choice but to extend my hand. It's an old habit of the sword vein. I hope you can understand if I do it more intensely, Grandmaster. This was something that had to be explained clearly. Half-immortals had keen senses, but they weren't immortals after all, so it was impossible for them to know everything. In the cultivation world, the most taboo thing was to have unclear movements. It was very easy for misunderstandings to arise, which would lead to endless disputes that would get out of hand. This was not the situation in biographies and novels, where one needed to constantly create contradictions in order to continue the plot. In the real world of cultivation, it was best to make things clear. The major disputes were basically Tao disputes, not all kinds of inexplicable misunderstandings caused by poor communication. Lu Xiaoyi's words had 2 meanings. First, the Scarlet Star had the support of the 5 Decay's mighty ones in the exterior realm. She was not a nobody who could be bullied by others. If you Buddhists want to destroy Crimson, then you must consider this relationship. The second meaning is that I'm not here with some kind of mission to purposely stir up trouble in Western phenomenon and create conflict between Buddhism and Taoism. But if you must force me to do so, then I don't mind stirring up trouble in Western phenomenon while I'm at it. Hands-free understood. To him, the small mountain realm was not involved in this matter, so there was no psychological pressure for him to stop. This dispute is a problem left behind by history. It's regional in nature and doesn't involve the root of the orthodoxy. Crimson Sword vein should belong to us Buddhists, so it's normal for us to have some small conflicts behind closed doors. As for misunderstandings, it's better to clear them up. As for fights, everyone has their own losses, so there's no need to be so calculative. In the future, everyone will travel the universe and make a living in Western phenomenon. It's better for everyone to take a step back, which is more conducive to the stability of Western Heaven. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Master, you're right. Crimson belongs to the Buddhist sword lineage, so of course it should belong to the category of Buddhism. But it's just that this big family is a little ruthless. Even if it's a real family, how many times can they withstand such changes and not have the desire to stand on their own? Hands-free said firmly, before the change of the era, there won't be any more similar alliances. The words of the great sage Heavens and the small mountain realm still count in Western Heaven. But the small conflicts between the realms are their own affairs. We won't interfere. What do you think, Lord Liu? Both sides had the intention to stop fighting, but they also had their own bottom line. Hands-free's meaning was that he could let go of anything, but the Crimson Sword vein could not be separated from the Buddhist system, because once it was separated, it would inevitably fall into the embrace of Taoism. This was something that Buddhism absolutely could not tolerate. Liu Xiaoyi's feelings were, in fact, that Buddhism was not Buddhism. It was more of a nominal thing. If Western Heaven's Buddhists valued this, then he would give it to them. He valued the part related to the sword more. In his opinion, whether it was Buddhism or Taoism, the main thing was to be able to turn one's heart to the sword when something really happened. As for what hat to wear, of course, he would wear a Taoist crown in the Eastern Heaven. In the Western Heaven, he would shave his head. What was the big deal? Hands-free's promise to not join forces with Western Heaven's Buddhists to suppress them was his goal. As for realms like the Fate Awakening Dharma world and the Bitter Tree world, as well as realms that would inevitably fight to the death with Scarlet in the future, those were unavoidable. If Scarlet could not deal with the alliance, then there was really no point in existing. This was a kind of exchange. He had to pay a price to maintain the overall situation and comply with the false reputation of Buddhism's leadership in exchange for his own safety. There was no need to wait for the era to change. When Tumuyun could come from the exterior world, there would naturally be arrangements, and he would not have any responsibility. Both sides had their own gains and losses. It was hard to say who was at a disadvantage, depending on which perspective you looked at it from. From Scarlet's point of view, this was already the best outcome. Scarlet's star was protected, and in the future, they would not have to face the pressure of the alliance. This was the best outcome that could not be better. They did not even dare to think about it before. But with Lu Xing's participation, the impossible became possible. From the alliance's point of view, they had made concessions. They had wasted a lot of time and resources, and they had ransacked 2 realms. Even though they clearly had the upper hand in terms of strength, they were still willing to reach such an agreement. It was more or less a bit anticlimactic. It was also because of this that Hands-free had a small request. In the Western Elephant Heaven, the small mountain realm can be considered a little famous. I heard that Hands-free's path of punishment is extensive, and you have also studied the essence of Buddhism. Are you willing to come and experience it? I'll be your guide and be your host. His meaning was clear. The reason why he was willing to agree to such conditions was not because of anything else, but because of Liu Xiaoyi. It was because he was willing to make friends with such a person that he was willing to compromise on the agreement and suffer some losses. Firstly, it was to smooth over the grudge between him and Liu Xiaoyi. Secondly, it was to make friends with a strong vision heaven in the small mountain realm. Xinyuan Sword Vein was not something Scarlet could compare to. It was a truly powerful force in the universe, and no one would refuse to have something to do with such a force. As for Taoism and Buddhism, under the different elephant heaven, they were somewhat insignificant. The key was that there was no visible conflict of interest, so why did they have to be hostile towards each other? In this sense, great cultivators who had reached a certain level would be able to see it clearly. It was difficult to become friends if one ate from the same pot. It was difficult to become enemies if one ate from different pots. It was a simple principle. Chapter 1973. Liu Xiaoyi knew that he couldn't reject it. It didn't mean that the agreement wouldn't be valid if he rejected it. The agreement would still exist, but how to implement it would be a problem. What was an alliance? 16 sects were an alliance. Did 3 or 5 sects count? They wouldn't make such a big deal out of it, with Yuan Zhu and Ku Shu as the leaders, and occasionally call in a few other sects to fight against Scarlet. This was a reflection of the influence of the Great Sage Heavens and the Little Su realm. As long as they were willing to suppress it, such a regional incident would definitely not occur. At most, the 2 victims and Scarlet would be at each other's throats for a long time, and they would be able to control the scope of the incident to a certain extent. Therefore, he couldn't reject it. Of course, understanding Buddhism and Scarlet and going Little Sumi domain were 2 completely different concepts. The Western Elephant Heavens was a place where Buddhism flourished, and a little mustard world was the top Buddhist existence in the Western Elephant Heavens. Basically, it could be said that it was the crown of Buddhism in the entire universe. It was very necessary for him to go to such a place to learn the Tao of Buddhism. It would be a waste not to learn. As for the danger, it didn't exist. With a hands-free guide, it was equivalent to little Su Mi Domain endorsing him. It was his guarantee of safety. The cultivators gathered together. The great holy heavens, little Su Mi Domain, Scarlet Star, Lu Xiaoyi represented the Xianyuan sword vein, and Duan Li represented the Western Taoists. Everyone signed the agreement, and the agreement was formed. Of course, they didn't include Lu Xiaoyi going to little Su Mi Domain as a guest. That was something that wasn't mentioned. After that, this agreement would be spread everywhere, including the 16 sects. When it came to fighting, they didn't even have a say in the agreement. This was the tragedy of being manipulated by others when they weren't strong enough. Lu Xiaoyi returned to the Scarlet Swordsman group and said, "I'm leaving. Old Yun's matter has come to an end. You can only rely on yourselves for the rest." More than 10 great Buddhas were paying their respects, and one of them stood out. "Thank you for your help. Scarlet will never forget this kindness." We understood the meaning of the imperial envoy. In this period of time, the imperial envoy had not mentioned the battle of the Diana sword. But through this battle, we saw it clearly. Be it Tao or Buddha, they were just outer appearances for others to see. It was a trick, as a sword vein. What we need to uphold is the swordsman's heart. Only by persevering on this point would one be able to find one's place in this chaotic world. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a Taoist robe or a cloak. The only useful thing you can do is to hack with a sword. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Always remember this. We are swordsmen. This is our route. No matter what day it is, don't change. He didn't linger and leaped to Duan Li's side. I'm going to the small Sumeru realm to abstain from meat and pray to Buddha. I wonder how the ladies there are like. Duan Li burst into laughter. The small Sumeru realm will regret today's invitation one day. They haven't really understood what it means to invite a wolf into the house. Speaking of ladies, the small Sumeru realm is too old-fashioned. It's better to go to the great holy heavens. Of course, I've only heard about it. I don't dare to go there, so I won't accompany you. Hands-free was his enemy, just like how the marching monks were to Lu Xiaoyi in the eastern sky. He wouldn't feel jealous just because Lu Xiaoyi was going to the small Sumeru realm as a guest. He wasn't that shallow. He was truly worried for the monks. This grandson of his was not a good guest, especially when he wanted to bring him home. Are you sure you've hidden all the good things at home? Both of them were very clear that similar disputes in the origin world would become less and less important in the future changes in the universe. They were already half-immortal great cultivators, so they shouldn't pay too much attention to these trivial matters. Cultivators at their level should not be involved in the traditional disputes of the so-called heavens and the so-called realms. They had to have their own status as half-immortals. The stage should be the stage when one's level is the stage. You're already a professional player. Why are you still running to kindergarten to find a sense of existence? Seeing Lu Xiaoyi wave his hand and leave, Duan Li shouted from behind, "Don't forget, in a few decades, the immortals of the interior realm will appear. It's a rare opportunity. Don't miss it." Lu Xiaoyi came in front of the two Western Sky cultivators and introduced them to him on hands-free. This is Senior Brother Wu Chao of the Great Holy Heavens. He's the famous virtuous senior monk of the Western Sky. The alliance this time was also arranged by him. The early stages were quite smooth, but when you came, it was incomparably depressing. Isn't that so? I just want to see what kind of person is able to toy with the senior brothers of the 5 dynasties in the Western Paradise for over 1,000 years. Lu Xiaoyi was very modest. It's just a spasm. But I don't dare to say it's a spasm. It's Hands-Free's fault. If I had found him earlier, we could have sat together drinking tea and chatting. Why would I have needed so many twists and turns? In the end, this person hid his intentions and hid from me from beginning to end. As a result, there was a lot of trouble below. Wu Chao nodded. Junior brother Hansfree's thoughts have always been many. He's famous in the western sky. Lord Lu, I came here shamelessly because I have some questions in my heart. I won't be happy if I don't ask. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Great master is too modest. But please speak frankly. I won't hide anything. Wu Chao stared at him. The Scarlet Plunder's movements must have come from Lord Lu's hands. I just want to know why you guys walked for more than 3 months when the distance between Destiny and Star Explosion was only a month. Was it intentional? Or was there some other reason? Lu Xiaoyi laughed involuntarily. How could it be so complicated? I just kept going forward and forgot about the negative space. You also know that I'm not familiar with the Scarlet Sorvain. They had some scruples. As for me, I had to put on some airs. So I ran like this for 3 months without any rest. Wu Chao was speechless. He had thought of countless reasons, but he never thought that the army would be so sloppy, as if it was child's play. Then, the second time you went to the Bitter Tree world, you found out that there was a negative space to borrow, so you returned to normal? Lu Xiaoyi was a little ashamed. That's right. If I could save some time, I would save some time. I was advised by others. Wu Chao continued to ask, why did you go back to plundering Destiny again? Did you sense danger? Or was it purely a coincidence? Were there any considerations in this? Lu Xiaoyi expressed his regret. He felt very sorry for letting the old man guess wrong. Originally, we wanted to kill our way back to the Scarlet Plunder. Later, the swordsman said that it was our first time plundering, so we were unfamiliar with it. Our plundering of Destiny was not very satisfactory. We were too nervous, too careless, and too rushed. So everyone decided to plunder again. Yes, to leave a more professional impression on others. Hands-free laughed heartily at the side. This was the unreasonable part of cultivation. If one's thoughts were too deep to deal with a careless person, the result would often be like this. But was it really because they were doing it casually? Not necessarily. Chapter 1974. The small Sumeru realm was not part of Lu Xiaoyi's itinerary. He was not someone who could be easily manipulated, much less be coerced. However, in terms of understanding the Tao realm, the Buddhist Tao realm was the most important part of his cultivation. It was a problem that had to be solved first. Therefore, to him, the small Sumeru realm was a place that was worth a visit. That was because the group of people who had the deepest understanding of the Buddhist Tao realm was there. Others said that there was always someone to learn from, but he would learn from wherever he went. He did not care if you were a Taoist or a monk. He was not picky at all. This was a kind of temperament that ordinary people could not learn. Lu Xiaoyi had been to many realms, including many Buddhist realms. However, it was his first time seeing a realm like the small Sumeru realm that was filled with the aura of orthodoxy. This was an innermost, embedded world that was rarely seen even in the universe. What did it mean? On the surface, it looked like a miniature spiritium domain. It was so small that it was probably the size of an ordinary human city. The larger meteors and the smallest planets were less than 10,000 feet in diameter. They were surrounded by a thick layer of gas and looked like a giant Buddha's head. Its secret was inside. As the saying goes, Mount Meru hides a mustard seed, and the mustard seed hides Mount Meru. Although it was small on the outside, it was huge on the inside. It was actually an embedded dimensional space. However, this dimensional space was open, and the exit was in the space of the main world outside. It was very strange. This was a treasured land, especially suitable for cultivation, because the size of the realm outside was too small. Relatively speaking, it could achieve the ultimate defense. Lu Xiaoyi could feel that even half-immortals could not break through the membrane of heaven and earth here. It was a pity that such a treasured land had fallen into the hands of the Buddhist sects. For millions of years, the Buddhist sects of the Western Paradise had nurtured countless outstanding monks. Historically speaking, the Western Paradise's Buddhist sects had even surpassed the great sage heavens. Hands-free was very proud. The small Sumeru realm has never been conquered. In fact, very few people have even tried. It is a wonderful place, a realm of good accumulation. Of course, in the eyes of your sword vein, you will definitely say that only a realm that has been conquered is a good realm, because it is more ancient. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Master, you know the sword vein very well. That's right, we would definitely think so. But it wasn't because of the beauty of the vicissitudes of life. In the Taoist philosophy, there was no such thing as an entire world, and no one was perfect. Perfection itself was the greatest imperfection. Flaws were also a part of everything in the universe, and a very important part at that, because that meant change. Because of its flaws, it was invaded. Because of the invasion, it was revived. This represented a self-healing ability. Just like a person, bleeding at an appropriate time was beneficial. It could train the body's hematopoietic function. However, if you didn't use this function for a long time, once you lost too much blood, it meant that you would lose the ability to recover. It's a beautiful domain, but it must have a flaw. Can you tell me where it is? The hands-free was straightforward. No, I'm afraid that my originally small flaw will be turned into a big hole by you. The two of them laughed heartily as they sank into the realm. I'm definitely not the first Taoist to come to the small Sumeru realm, but I thought that there wouldn't be many Taoist guests here. What's the point? The speaker said meaningfully, Lord Lu is right. The small Sumeru realm has never been a hospitable domain. It values orthodoxy more than other Buddhist sects. Therefore, those who can enter must at least be invited by the great Buddha. Only friends can enter. Once you enter, you'll realize that they are not wary of friends. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a Taoist robe or not. In the history of cultivation, how many monks and Taoists wear Taoist robes? With the speaker's invitation, the true face of the small Sumer realm unfolded before his eyes. He was very clear about the speaker's intention. It represented many things. The so-called involuntary cooperation between the exterior masters and the marching monks, personal relationships, the hope to strengthen the connection between the small Sumeru realm and the five rings on the cosmic level in the future, possible cooperation, all of these were understandable. He was also willing to cooperate, because his opponents were not Buddhists, but some higher goals. He couldn't even be sure who they were and which forces. It was a group of interests, including Buddhists and Taoists. Looking at the small Sumeru realm from the cosmic void, it was only the size of a meteorite. But once he entered, he realized that it was a different world. This was a large space that could even be compared to the five rings. Auspicious clouds lingered, and faint Sanskrit chants could be heard. Lu Xiaoyi carefully experienced it and couldn't help but laugh. This is actually the main world, but it's not an independent space. The rules of the heavenly Tao are also the rules of the main world. It's like digging out a piece of dimensional space. The miraculous nature of the Creator is truly breathtaking. The speaker smiled. Lord Lu, you have sharp eyes. Come, let me introduce you to the virtuous eminent monks of the small Sumeru realm. Here, Lord Lu, you can stay as you wish. You can also stay for a long time. I hope the small Sumeru realm can leave a good impression on you. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It's better if it's not too good. Otherwise, I won't be able to control myself and will want to snatch it. Great Master, please introduce me to the virtuous monks of the world. Although I cultivate the sword, I'm not unfamiliar with the essence of Buddhism. I might have to stay for a while to see the true wonders of Buddhism. What he meant was that he wanted to stay for a while. This gave a speaker a lot of face. Otherwise, if he hurried over, it would just be for the sake of the contract, which in itself would represent alienation. Since Lu Xiaoyi gave him face, the speaker naturally had to return the favor. The small Sumeru realm is big. There's nowhere you can't go. If you don't mind, there's a large-scale Dharma assembly right now. That's the best opportunity for you to enter. The two walked side by side, chatting and laughing as they left. There were countless ways to seek knowledge in the cultivation world. Among them, the most impossible method was the method of fighting one family at a time. Did they take others for fools? But there was one method that was the most popular and the most effective. It was the method of visiting scholars. With the goal of improving each other, it was a pure exchange of Tao realms. But this method had high requirements for the scholar. You had to be really capable and be able to do what others couldn't. Only then would there be value in the exchange. Otherwise, if you couldn't even speak a few words, you would sound like a big idiot. Who would want to learn with you? Lu Xiaoyi was blessed in this aspect. He had more than 10 Tao realms in his hands. Among them, there was no lack of genuine Buddhist Tao realms. For example, merit, impermanence, reincarnation. These are the weapons he used to exchange with the monks. This was a rare place to improve one's Tao realms. Merit, nirvana, karma, and so on. With the best teachers, there would be the best students. Tao realms were things that needed to stand on the shoulders of giants and look forward. It wasn't something that needed to be groped from the beginning. He cherished such opportunities very much. Chapter 1975. The universe, according to its own laws, was unwavering in change. Everyone knew that change was imminent, but they did not know where it would start. Some were fast, such as some astronomical phenomena, collapse, rebirth, acceleration, chaos, but some were slow. Cultivators gradually realized that those who were under the constraints of the existing Tao realm were more stable. The rapid changes in astronomical phenomena were due to problems with the foundation of the five ties, but those who did not rely on the five ties were still stable, such as the exterior and exterior heaven. Smoky Puppet returned to the interior heaven, and two friends welcomed her. Western Elephant Heaven? Why did that guy go so far away? I was wondering why he didn't come back after almost 100 years. Did he go wild? She laughed. This is the news that Duanli brought back from the Western Heaven a few days ago. According to our guess, he was thrown there by the exterior heaven immortal. You know senior brother Lu's temper. He definitely won't come back. Smoky Puppet frowned. Even the immortals won't come back? Or did he cause trouble in the Western Heaven again? Shiyu shook his head. I can't guess. But he didn't seem to cause any trouble in the Western Elephant Heaven. When he first went there, he fought for the sword vein in the Western Heaven. Later on, as he fought, he became one with the Buddhists. Now I heard that he's with the hands-free monk and they're stuck together like glue. Is he too happy to think about home? Xin snorted. He definitely won't come back because he's not interested in such immortals. Watching others become immortals is like watching others marry and enter the bridal chamber. Some people like it. Some people would rather do it themselves. He's the kind of person who likes to do it himself. As for being one with the Buddhists, humph, sooner or later, the Buddhists will have nothing to wear. He's going to steal the Tao realm. Don't I know him? He's just like that bamboo hat guy. He wants to eat a fatty in one bite. He can't wait to collect all the 36 great Taos and create his own new toy. Smoky Puppet came back this time to see the immortals appear. Actually, for half immortals like them, they understood that other people's immortals were other people's. Since the beginning of cultivation, there had never been an identical immortal ascension routine. Not to mention the spirit, there wasn't even a resemblance. They would still come, looking for that feeling, that touch. On the surface, there were people like Lu Xiaoyi who didn't care at all, but there were more who looked at it rationally. It was no secret to his friends that Lu Xiaoyi was accumulating Tao realm. In fact, everyone was accumulating Tao realm, but he was not the only one. It was just that he was accumulating more and less. There are not many people like Lu Xiaoyi who had crossed the boundary of Taoism and Buddhism, not only in terms of perception and understanding, but also in terms of opportunity and time. The purpose of accumulating Tao states was to give himself more choices, or to form a new innate Tao through the combination of Tao states. With 36 innate Taos, there would definitely be changes. There would be new Taos and also some that would be eliminated. In fact, the number of innate Taos might not even be 36. Therefore, clinging onto an innate Tao was very dangerous because you might be clinging onto a Tao that would no longer be an innate Tao in the future. Unless you could resist the universe's changes with your own strength, that would be impossible. This was the consensus in the half-immortal world. Therefore, combining Tao realm was very popular. There were many new Tao realm methods. But until the very last moment, who could say for sure? They knew that Lu Xiaoyi had accumulated a lot of Tao realm and was a little desperate. In the interior heaven, the bamboo hat was the same as him. But regarding the bamboo hat and Lu Xiaoyi's relationship, Guqing Xian did not mention it to anyone, especially to Yin Chang. He was afraid that this tough woman would pick up her sword and attack. He was never worried about Lu Xiaoyi picking up a sword, but other people could not. They were too far apart. You guys are thinking about that bamboo hat again? I'm curious. Just because he's accumulating Tao realm? Yin Chang knew that Qing Xian did not have a good impression of this person, but she did not understand why he always feigned civility with this person. If there was a grudge, just settle it. Was there a need to drag it out? Qing Xian explained, "That's not thinking, it's flattery. It's praise. He could become a half-immortal as a Yin spirit. In the interior heaven, he's the first one. I admire people with such abilities. He knows when to advance and when to retreat. He's much better than that stick Lu." Yin Chang looked at him suspiciously. She did not believe his nonsense. Beside her, Xiu laughed. The flattery of the three pure ones should be called lifting high, understand? Lifting all the way, then pulling out the ladder. Yin Chang was speechless. The three pure ones and the supreme ones were like this. They were too mean, but they definitely had a purpose. If it was the enemy of these two people, they would not beat around the bush. They could not do it. The only reason why they went through so much trouble was to stand up for someone. In the interior heaven, who else had the qualifications to make them spare no effort for almost 100 years? If they had the chance to catch that guy, they would definitely interrogate him. She knew that they did not want her to know. There were many reasons. Their impulsive temper was probably the first one. Regarding this, she had always pretended not to know. It was not easy to interfere in that guy's affairs. Not because she was afraid of trouble, but because she was afraid of causing trouble for that guy. This was the attitude of the three people in the fifth ring on the bamboo hat. Only Qing Xian knew, but the other two people had already noticed it and then did something bad together. However, Yin Chang was obviously not as bad as the other two, so there were still some things that she did not understand. This time, the demi-immortal monsters are also allowed to participate in the exhibition of the immortals because we have contributed to the way of heaven when we were in the exterior heaven. But what I don't understand is, why would you allow those cultivators who have not participated in the exterior heaven to participate? Don't tell me that you are broad-minded and have something bad in mind. The exhibition of the immortals in the interior heaven was held once every 360 years. It was the most important group activity in the interior heaven. There were not as many Dharma assemblies here as there were in the exterior heaven. Basically, everyone practiced their own cultivation. The exhibition of the immortals was almost the only chance for everyone to gather. Those who could enter the interior sky were half-immortals of the interior realm, and they would have the opportunity to observe. This was not a bad thing, but the distance to observe would depend on one's own ability. The half-immortals were very outstanding, but this only referred to the future. In terms of their current strength, there was still a practical gap between them and these famous young god half-immortals and second severance half-immortals. They still did not have the ability to compete with these interior realm seniors with their own abilities. There were thousands of demi-immortals in the interior heaven, but there were only a few dozen good spots. The remaining demi-immortals could only queue from the nearest to the furthest. When one's turn was 500, the so-called observation was no longer an observation, but a feeling. If Lu Xiaoyi was here, he might be able to fight his way in with his own strength. However, the other monsters, including Qing Xian, could not do it. They were only around 500. If they wanted to get to the front, they could only rely on special cases. This was because during the Dharma assembly that was held when the monsters first came to the interior heaven, they moved the top 6 of the immortals to get 6 places in the front. Chapter 1976. Of course, Only those who had been to the exterior realm were qualified for these 5 special cases. This was a matter of course. It was also the rule of the cultivation world. However, there were still some people among the geniuses who were stirring up trouble. The group led by Marching Monk knew that they had already lost the support of the first batch of geniuses, so they naturally set their sights on the new half-immortal geniuses who had joined in the past 100 years, as well as those who weren't part of the Heavenly Eyes organization. Unexpectedly, he had also recruited a group of people. These people were also interested in the immortals, but unfortunately, there was no way around it. At this moment, Marching Monk took the initiative to give up his spot. Firstly, it was to fulfill his promise, and secondly, it was to avoid controversy. There was a rumor that the half-immortal geniuses should be considered as a whole. If Lu Xing was here, he would definitely give his place to someone else in order to show the friendship of all the interior geniuses as a whole. If Lu Xiaoyi was really in the interior realm, no one would have thought of such nonsense. However, it was precisely because he was not there that some of these fantasies became reality. Moreover, Marching Monk gave up his spot. Everyone knew that Qing Xian and Lu Ting were in the same boat. How he handled this matter was crucial. If he refused to give up his spot, he would offend the new batch of half-immortals. If he chose to give up, he would leave an impression of incompetence in the eyes of the old demons. It was a real dilemma. Qing Xian's response was very natural. Weren't there 6 spots? Those who were willing to give up their spot could do so. However, as Lu Ting's friend, he made the decision to give up his spot. This move successfully weakened the group of demons of the interior realm and emphasized the choice of individuals. It was also a very suitable response. The spot was given up, but who it was given to became a problem. As a most abnormal demon in the interior realm, Bamboo Hat was the target of Marching Monk of the Buddhist sect. Marching Monk was very clear that the spot of Taoism would never be given to the Buddhist sect. Therefore, after some maneuvering, he created momentum for Bamboo Hat, which led to the fact that Bamboo Hat got the first spot. It was acceptable to outsiders because he was the only one who became a half-immortal through Yin's spirit. He was the only one in the interior realm. However, Yinmu knew that Qing Xian could still stop them because Lu Xiaoyi's influence in interior heaven was still far greater than that of Buddhism. Junior sister, are you blaming us for not reserving a spot for you? Qing Xian remained calm. Smokey shook his head. In theory, little E and I are from the same sect. It's natural for me to go to his position, but you know that I won't go. I just don't understand why that Bamboo Hat. There are many other better choices, right? Qing Xian smiled. I understand. You swordsmen have a bad temper. You're not greedy for food. Why didn't we stop the Bamboo Hats from ascending to the throne? There are some other reasons. Shiyu continued. Actually, it's just a feeling. The universe is in chaos, and the epoch is about to change. All sorts of chaotic phenomena are present, and no place can remain unaffected. Judging from the drastic changes in the celestial phenomena of the main world and the disturbance of the heart plate in the exterior realm, there's no reason for the interior realm to remain peaceful forever. Smokey was taken aback. The immortals will have a problem? How come no one else noticed this? Qing Xian snickered. No one noticed my ass. Those old guys at the second severance are all shrewd. Why did they give us 6 spots at the spiritual conference? Do they really think they were all good people helping the younger generation? There's a trap buried here. However, these premonitions only belong to those old cultivators at the second severance. They wouldn't say it out loud. Whoever was unlucky deserved it. One less competitor was one less competitor. Since that's the case, why are we fighting over this spot? If it wasn't too obvious, I'd even want to give up my spot. Smokey looked at the 2 cunning guys. You all know little E. Qing Xian rolled her eyes. That thing is more shrewd than a monkey. That's why he King didn't even come back. Because if he came back, it would be too obvious if he actively gave up his spot. When have you ever heard of Enforcer Lu spitting out something that he had already eaten? But he asked me to take care of you. If you don't fight for this spot, then you don't have to say anything. If Junior Sister has any doubts, then I'll dissuade you. Smokey scolded jokingly. You guys are all bad? So you're all working together to trap the Buddhists? Qing Xian said righteously. How is this called a trap? It's a premonition in the first place. It may happen, and it may not happen. Not to mention us. Aren't those old guys at the second severance also keeping silent? Who knows? They might even have that great perseverance, courage, and fearlessness to charge forward. In terms of cultivation philosophy, if everyone retreats and I charge forward alone, it's also a kind of disposition to accomplish great things. We can't stand in their way. Smokey was amused and said, I think the two of you have this kind of disposition. Shiyu shook his head like a rattle drum. I don't have the disposition. I'm afraid of death. Qing Xian was awe-inspiring. As friends, Lu Tong should get such a great benefit first. If we don't fight with him, that's too unfriendly. Smokey was puzzled. In the interior heaven, it's fine if you have an ordinary background, but can't you see those with extraordinary backgrounds like the marching monks of the Buddhist sect in Miami? Shiyu explained, we can see. We definitely can see. But even if we see, why should we say it? The two of us have no choice. If we don't stop you, junior sister, senior brother Lu will definitely make trouble for the two of us later. If we were in a state of 5 rings in the past, with a relationship between 5 rings Taoists and Swordvein, how could we possibly warn you? Not to mention you. Senior brother Qing Xian won't even tell me. He can't wait for the others to be unlucky, and for him to be the only one to prove great Tao. Qing Xian said angrily, how can you say that? At most, I'll lend you a hand when you're down on your luck, and owe you a favor. How can you speak so casually without telling the truth? This is also because we, the 3 pure ones, are soft-hearted. If we chase that bastard Lu Tong away, he'll definitely throw stones at us when we fall into the pit. Shiyu agreed from the side. That's right. Senior brother Lu has done many things like hitting someone when they're down, and is very skilled. Smokey understood. There were many reasons why the marching monks had stood up for their bamboo hats. They were disgusted with Lu Xiaoyi's group, and actually didn't have any good intentions towards the bamboo hats themselves. After all, there was a gulf between Taoism and Buddhism. You, Ayin God half immortal, are very impressive. You want to be the evildoer of evildoers and suppress others? You didn't show up when there was trouble. You didn't show up when inner and outer Jing Tian confronted each other outside Hung River. You hid when the outer Jing Tian was being punished. Now that there are benefits, you're starting to show up? The marching monks' goal was uncertain, so they could accept any result. If something happens, you deserve it. This is a lesson. Kill the self-righteous momentum. If you get benefits, you have to thank us Buddhism for supporting you. No matter what the result is, Buddhism is the winner, so it's a waste not to take advantage of them. The key is that the support behind you is not strong enough. You want to show off when you don't have a backing? If not you, then who? Chapter 1977. The ranking of the immortals in the interior heaven was in full swing. For most of the demi-immortals, their abilities had not yet reached the level where they could accurately perceive the universe. They also did not have the support of a powerful force, so they were ignorant of all this. The rhythm of the competition was the same as before. The evildoers were also fanning the flames, but they were basically in the state of being bystanders. Their purpose was to participate, so it was not good for them to set goals and plans for themselves. They were the main characters in the main world, but they still had a long time to become the main force in the interior heaven. Amidst such chaos, as the day of the immortals' appearance drew nearer and nearer, the approximate position and ranking gradually became clear, and gradually, the chatter died down. The 3 people of the 5 rings were all in the top 500. This was Yin Chun and Shiyu's true ability. Qing Xian had not done her best, so everyone gathered together and prepared to watch the fun from afar. Together with them were Bei Feng, Qi Fan, Yu Du, and the others. There were also those who rushed forward based on their ability. No one could control their personal choice. The evildoers occupied the front row. There were 6 places: bamboo hat, Duan Li, speakerphone, Hong Tiangang, third watch, and so on. Among them, only Bamboo was closest to the core of the immortal circle because his position was obtained from Lu Xiaoyi. Back then, Lu Xiaoyi was the first in the immortal circle, so his position was naturally different from the other 5 places. Everyone settled down and quietly waited for the immortals to appear. Everyone knew that as the universe changed faster and faster, there would not be many opportunities like this. Every time they saw it, there would be less of it. It was hard to say whether the interior heaven would still exist after the real change of the era. It was also unknown whether the immortals represented by the immortals were still around. Who knew? Under the gaze of all the demi-immortals, an immortal world was slowly sliding to the center. It was the 5 Flowers Celestial Mountain. In the history of the 5 Flowers Celestial Mountain, after the interior heaven was formed, there had never been an immortal world that appeared in the center of the interior heaven. This was not a rare occurrence in the interior heaven. In fact, most of the more than 3,000 immortals in the interior realm had never shown their immortals before. They were only there to serve as a foil. Among the 3,000 immortals, most of them were internet celebrities who had repeatedly flown to the center to show off their immortals. Even more were those who were unknown. The 5 Flowers Immortal Mountain was such a low-key immortal. Its master who became an immortal was the 5 Flowers Immortal Elder. He was also not famous and kept a low profile. In the knowledge of the half-immortals, it seemed that they had never heard of such a person in the immortal court. He was on the immortal list, but had no official position. This was the treatment of ordinary immortals. Comparatively speaking, the immortal monarch of the inner and outer scenic sky, Heavenly Eye Immortal Monarch, and the immortal monarch in charge of the 4-symbol sky were all registered figures with positions. They could be considered to have some status in the immortal court. As the universe was changing and nearing the end of the era, such an unknown immortal's immortal miracle had slid into the center of the interior heaven. The significance of this was very memorable. Wuhua Immortal Mountain? I've never been there. Is it the root of the 5 elements? Qifan asked. He had only been in the interior heaven for about 100 years. It was still a short time, so he didn't know all the 3,000 immortals in the interior heaven. In fact, even an old person might not know every immortal mountain, especially those that had never shown themselves. However, Qing Xian was a know-it-all. It's not the root of the 5 elements. It's the post-celestial leap, Earth Great Tao. It's also not based on the 5 elements, but the combination of the 5 elements' Great Tao state. Smokey's heart skipped a beat. She understood Qing Xian's implication. The 5 elements had already collapsed. Was this going to have consequences in the immortal world? In the interior heaven, every master of the immortal world walked the ancient path. For example, the most famous beheading 3 corpses. However, they each had their own strengths in the Tao state. In fact, none of them were based on the 36 pre-celestial great Taos. The reason was unknown. It was probably because the body of the interior heaven couldn't withstand these golden immortals' immortal transformation. The half-immortals here were watching the immortal world announcement. In fact, they weren't watching the Tao state, but the process of the final beheading, that kind of indescribable thing that couldn't be passed down on paper. What ancient method did deity Wu Hua use? This time, the person asking was Yu ever since the exterior heaven's punishment. He and Qifan had completely invested in the Lu Xiaoguang group. Hanging out with the second-in-command Qing Xian and the others was an inevitable choice. If one wanted to stand out among the half-immortals, one had to have the capital to do so. So far, there weren't many who had such capital. Duanli was one, Hong Tiangang was another, and probably Mantai was another. Of course, the one who was in the limelight the most was Bamboo Hat. When he became a half-immortal, he was in the Yin's spirit realm. That was quite abnormal. Qing Xian was omniscient. The ancient method used by deity Wu Hua is quite special. It's the triple quenching of the oven. It's considered a high-risk immortal ascension method in the ancient method. There's no retreat in the process. If there's a slight mistake, you won't even have the chance to regret it. That's why it's rare. It's also the reason why the Five Flowers Celestial Mountain hasn't been able to float into the center of the immortal world announcement since the interior heaven. The triple quenching of the oven was to use the cultivator's body as an oven to forge one's self. At every stage, one would need one's own body, cultivation base, elemental force, spiritual will, Tao state accumulation, physical body refinement, and even some very special external treasures. One would burn and refine oneself to call forth new life. After doing this 3 times, one would be able to ascend to the top. Of course, the premise was that there couldn't be a single mistake in the process. The pursuit of perfection to the extreme, the conditions were quite harsh. There were too many methods in the so-called upper realm of the ancient method. The definition of the cultivation world was that other than the method of the waning realm, all other immortal ascension methods were counted as ancient methods. It could be seen that it encompassed a wide range of things. Among these countless ancient methods, there were also differences in popularity, difficulty of immortal ascension, and high and low realms. Among them, the corpse severing method was the best among the ancient methods. Not only was the immortal ascension method high in quality, but it was also possible to repeatedly try it. The other immortal ascension ancient methods also had their own wonders, but compared to the corpse severing method, they were inferior. For example, the triple quenching of the oven was the most unpopular method. The success rate was very low. The immortal ascension method was not good. The process was extremely dangerous, and it was very picky about the cultivator's talent. It belonged to the category of methods that were gradually being eliminated among the ancient methods. It had no practical significance. Since the development of cultivation until now, even the half-immortals of the interior heaven who advocated ancient methods were not willing to use such ancient methods to achieve immortal ascension. Therefore, there was a profound reason why they always floated outside and did not enter the center. But this time, the Five Flowers Celestial Mountain finally squeezed out other web celebrity immortals, such as the 3 Corpses Immortals, the Portrait Immortals, and so on. It made everyone's imagination run wild. Of course, with the changes of the universe, all kinds of abnormalities occurred frequently. It was normal for the interior heaven to have demonic moths, but it would be abnormal if they didn't. A celestial mountain that had never floated into the center had squeezed in this time. It didn't seem to be a big deal. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.